Welcome to Audiobook Empire. You are about to listen to The Law of Success by Napoleon Hill, Volume 4 of 8, covering enthusiasm and self-control. This is the legendary 24-lesson course Napoleon Hill spent 20 years building and the direct foundation behind Think and Grow Rich. Narrated by Michael Stone, sit back and let's begin. Lesson 7, Enthusiasm. I gave a beggar a dime with the suggestion that he invest it in a copy of Elbert Hubbard's Message to Garcia. Lesson 7, Enthusiasm. You can do it if you believe you can. Enthusiasm is a state of mind that inspires and arouses one to put action into the task at hand. It does more than this. It is contagious and vitally affects not only the enthusiast, but all with whom he comes in contact. Enthusiasm bears the same relationship to a human being that steam does to the locomotive. It is the vital moving force that impels action. The greatest leaders of men are those who know how to inspire enthusiasm in their followers. Enthusiasm is the most important factor entering into salesmanship. It is, by far, the most vital factor that enters into public speaking. If you wish to understand the difference between a man who is enthusiastic and one who is not, compare Billy Sunday with the average man of his profession. The finest sermon ever delivered would fall upon deaf ears if it were not backed with enthusiasm by the speaker. How enthusiasm will affect you? Mix enthusiasm with your work, and it will not seem hard or monotonous. Enthusiasm will so energize your entire body that you can get along with less than half the usual amount of sleep, and at the same time it will enable you to perform from 2 to 3 times as much work as you usually perform in a given period, without fatigue. For many years I have done most of my writing at night. One night while I was enthusiastically at work over my typewriter, I looked out of the window of my study, just across the square from the Metropolitan Tower in New York City, and saw what seemed to be the most peculiar reflection of the moon on the tower. It was of a silvery gray shade, such as I had never seen before. Upon closer inspection, I found that the reflection was that of the early morning sun and not that of the moon. It was daylight. I had been at work all night, but I was so engrossed in my work that the night had passed as though it were but an hour. I worked at my task all that day and all the following night without stopping, except for a small amount of light food. 2 nights and 1 day without sleep, and with but little food, without the slightest evidence of fatigue, would not have been possible had I not kept my body energized with enthusiasm over the work at hand. Enthusiasm is not merely a figure of speech. It is a vital force that you can harness and use with profit. Without it, you would resemble an electric battery without electricity. Enthusiasm is the vital force with which you recharge your body and develop a dynamic personality. Some people are blessed with natural enthusiasm, while others must acquire it. The procedure through which it may be developed is simple. It begins by the doing of the work or rendering of the service which one likes best. If you should be so situated that you cannot conveniently engage in the work which you like best, for the time being, then you can proceed along another line very effectively by adopting a definite chief aim that contemplates your engaging in that particular work at some future time. Lack of capital and many other circumstances over which you have no immediate control may force you to engage in work which you do not like, but no one can stop you from determining in your own mind what your definite chief aim in life shall be. Nor can anyone stop you from planning ways and means for translating this aim into reality, nor can anyone stop you from mixing enthusiasm with your plans. Happiness, the final object of all human effort, is a state of mind that can be maintained only through the hope of future achievement. Happiness lies always in the future and never in the past. The happy person is the one who dreams of heights of achievement that are yet unattained. The home you intend to own, the money you intend to earn and place in the bank, the trip you intend to take when you can afford it, the position in life you intend to fill when you have prepared yourself, and the preparation itself, these are the things that produce happiness. Likewise, these are the materials out of which your definite chief aim is formed. These are the things over which you may become enthusiastic, no matter what your present station in life may be. More than 20 years ago, I became enthusiastic over an idea. When the idea first took form in my mind, I was unprepared to take even the first step toward its transformation into reality. But I nursed it in my mind. I became enthusiastic over it as I looked ahead in my imagination and saw the time when I would be prepared to make it a reality. The idea was this. I wanted to become the editor of a magazine based upon the golden rule, through which I could inspire people to keep up courage and deal with one another squarely. Finally, my chance came. And on Armistice Day, 191-8, I wrote the first editorial for what was to become the material realization of a hope that had lain dormant in my mind for nearly a score of years. With enthusiasm, I poured into that editorial the emotions which I had been developing in my heart over a period of more than 20 years. My dream had come true. My editorship of a national magazine had become a reality. As I have stated, this editorial was written with enthusiasm. I took it to a man of my acquaintance, and with enthusiasm I read it to him. The editorial ended in these words: "At last my 20-year-old dream is about to come true." It takes money, and a lot of it, to publish a national magazine, and I haven't the slightest idea where I am going to get this essential factor, but this is worrying me not at all, because I know I am going to get it somewhere. As I wrote those lines, I mixed enthusiasm and faith with them. I had hardly finished reading this editorial when the man to whom I read it, the first and only person to whom I had shown it, said, "I can tell you where you are going to get the money, for I am going to supply it." And he did. Yes, enthusiasm is a vital force, so vital in fact that no man who has it highly developed can begin even to approximate his power of achievement. Before passing to the next step in this lesson, I wish to repeat and to emphasize the fact that you may develop enthusiasm over your definite chief aim in life, no matter whether you are in position to achieve that purpose at this time or not. You may be a long way from realization of your definite chief aim, but if you will kindle the fire of enthusiasm in your heart and keep it burning, before very long the obstacles that now stand in the way of your attainment of that purpose will melt away as if by the force of magic, and you will find yourself in possession of power that you did not know you possessed. How your enthusiasm will affect others. We come now to the discussion of one of the most important subjects of this reading course, namely suggestion. In the preceding lessons, we have discussed the subject of autosuggestion, which is self-suggestion. You saw in Lesson 3 what an important part autosuggestion played. Suggestion is the principle through which your words and your acts and even your state of mind, one of the most valuable things any man can learn, is the art of using the knowledge and experience of others. Influence others. That you may comprehend the far-reaching power of suggestion, let me refer to the introductory lesson, in which the principle of telepathy is described. If you now understand and accept the principle of telepathy, the communication of thought from one mind to another without the aid of signs, symbols, or sounds, as a reality, you of course understand why enthusiasm is contagious, and why it influences all within its radius. When your own mind is vibrating at a high rate, because it has been stimulated with enthusiasm, that vibration registers in the minds of all within its radius, and especially in the minds of those with whom you come in close contact. When a public speaker senses the feeling that his audience is en rapport with him, he merely recognizes the fact that his own enthusiasm has influenced the minds of his listeners until their minds are vibrating in harmony with his own. When the salesman senses the fact that the psychological moment for closing a sale has arrived, he merely feels the effect of his own enthusiasm as it influences the mind of his prospective buyer and places that mind en rapport in harmony with his own. The subject of suggestion constitutes so vitally an important part of this lesson, and of this entire course, that I will now proceed to describe the three mediums through which it usually operates. Namely, what you say, what you do, and what you think. When you are enthusiastic over the goods you are selling, or the services you are offering, or the speech you are delivering, your state of mind becomes obvious to all who hear you by the tone of your voice. Whether you have ever thought of it in this way or not, it is the tone in which you make a statement, more than it is the statement itself, that carries conviction or fails to convince. No mere combination of words can ever take the place of a deep belief in a statement that is expressed with burning enthusiasm. Words are but devitalized sounds unless colored with feeling that is born of enthusiasm. Here the printed word fails me, for I can never express with mere type and paper the difference between words that fall from unemotional lips, without the fire of enthusiasm back of them, and those which seem to pour forth from a heart that is bursting with eagerness for expression. The difference is there, however. Thus, what you say and the way in which you say it conveys a meaning that may be just the opposite to what is intended. This accounts for many a failure by the salesman who presents his arguments in words which seem logical enough, but lack the coloring that can come only from enthusiasm that is born of sincerity and belief in the goods he is trying to sell. His words said one thing, but the tone of his voice suggested something entirely different. Therefore, no sale was made. That which you say is an important factor in the operation of the principle of suggestion, but not nearly so important as that which you do. Your acts will count for more than your words, and woe unto you if the two fail to harmonize. If a man preach the golden rule as a sound rule of conduct, his words will fall upon deaf ears if he does not practice that which he preaches. The most effective sermon that any man can preach on the soundness of the golden rule is that which he preaches by suggestion, when he applies this rule in his relationships with his fellow men. If a salesman of Ford automobiles drives up to his prospective purchaser in a Buick or some other make of car, all the arguments he can present in behalf of the Ford will be without effect. Once I went into one of the offices of the dictaphone company to look at a dictaphone dictating machine. The salesman in charge presented a logical argument as to the machine's merits, while the stenographer at his side was transcribing letters from a shorthand notebook. His arguments in favor of a dictating machine, as compared with the old method of dictating to a stenographer, did not impress me, because his actions were not in harmony with his words. Your thoughts constitute the most important of the three ways in which you apply the principle of suggestion, for the reason that they control the tone of your words and, to some extent at least, your actions. If your thoughts and your actions and your words harmonize, you're bound to influence those with whom you come in contact, more or less toward your way of thinking. We will now proceed to analyze the subject of suggestion and to show you exactly how to apply the principle upon which it operates. As we have already seen, suggestion differs from autosuggestion only in one way. We use it, consciously or unconsciously, when we influence others, while we use autosuggestion as a means of influencing ourselves. Before you can influence another person through suggestion, that person's mind must be in a state of neutrality. That is, it must be open and receptive to your method of suggestion. Right here is where most salesmen fail. They try to make a sale before the mind of the prospective buyer has been rendered receptive or neutralized. This is such a vital point in this lesson that I feel impelled to dwell upon it until there can be no doubt that you understand the principle that I am describing. When I say that the salesman must neutralize the mind of his prospective purchaser before a sale can be made, I mean that the prospective purchaser's mind must be credulous. A state of confidence must have been established, and it is obvious that there can be no set rule for either establishing confidence or neutralizing the mind to a state of openness. Here the ingenuity of the salesman must supply that which cannot be set down as a hard and fast rule. I know a life insurance salesman who sells nothing but large policies, amounting to $100,000 and upward. Before this man even approaches the subject of insurance with a prospective client, he familiarizes himself with the prospective client's complete history, including his education, his financial status, his eccentricities if he has any, his religious preferences, and other data too numerous to be listed. Armed with this information, he manages to secure an introduction under conditions which permit him to know the prospective client in a social as well as a business way. Nothing is said about the sale of life insurance during his first visit, nor his second, and sometimes he does not approach the subject of insurance until he has become very well acquainted with the prospective client. All this time, however, he is not dissipating his efforts. He is taking advantage of these friendly visits for the purpose of neutralizing his prospective client's mind. That is, he is building up a relationship of confidence so that when the time comes for him to talk life insurance, that which he says will fall upon ears that willingly listen. Some years ago I wrote a book entitled How to Sell Your Services. Just before the manuscript went to the publisher, it occurred to me to request some of the well-known men of the United States to write letters of endorsement to be published in the book. The printer was then waiting for the manuscript. Therefore, I hurriedly wrote a letter to some 8 or 10 men, in which I briefly outlined exactly what I wanted, but the letter brought back no replies. I had failed to observe 2 important prerequisites for success. I had written the letter so hurriedly that I had failed to inject the spirit of enthusiasm into it, and I had neglected so to word the letter that it had the effect of neutralizing the minds of those to whom it was sent. Therefore, I had not paved the way for the application of the principle of suggestion. After I discovered my mistake, I then wrote a letter that was based upon strict application of the principle of suggestion, and this letter not only brought back replies from all to whom it was sent, but many of the replies were masterpieces and served, far beyond my fondest hopes, as valuable supplements to the book. For the purpose of comparison, to show you how the principle of suggestion may be used in writing a letter, and what an important part enthusiasm plays in giving the written word flesh, the 2 letters are here reproduced. It will not be necessary to indicate which letter failed, as that will be quite obvious. A careful inventory of all your past experiences may disclose the startling fact that everything has happened for the best. My dear Mr. Ford, I am just completing a manuscript for a new book entitled How to Sell Your Services. I anticipate the sale of several 100,000 of these books, and I believe those who purchase the book would welcome the opportunity of receiving a message from you as to the best method of marketing personal services. Would you therefore be good enough to give me a few minutes of your time by writing a brief message to be published in my book? This will be a big favor to me personally, and I know it would be appreciated by the readers of the book. Thanking you in advance for any consideration you may care to show me, I am yours very truly, Hun. Thomas R. Marshall, Vice President of the United States, Washington, D.C. My dear Mr. Marshall, would you care for the opportunity to send a message of encouragement and possibly a word of advice to a few 100,000 of your fellow men who have failed to make their mark in the world as successfully as you have done? I have about completed a manuscript for a book to be entitled How to Sell Your Services. The main point made in the book is that service rendered is cause and the pay envelope is effect, and that the latter varies in proportion to the efficiency of the former. The book would be incomplete without a few words of advice from a few men who, like yourself, have come up from the bottom to enviable positions in the world. Therefore, if you will write me of your views as to the most essential points to be borne in mind by those who are offering personal services for sale, I will pass your message on through my book, which will ensure its getting into hands where it will do a world of good for a class of earnest people who are struggling to find their places in the world's work. I know you are a busy man, Mr. Marshall, but please bear in mind that by simply calling in your secretary and dictating a brief letter, you will be sending forth an important message to possibly 500,000 people. In money, this will not be worth to you the 2-cent stamp that you will place on the letter, but if estimated from the viewpoint of the good it may do others who are less fortunate than yourself, it may be worth the difference between success and failure to many a worthy person who will read your message, believe in it, and be guided by it. Very cordially yours. Now, let us analyze the two letters and find out why one failed in its mission while the other succeeded. This analysis should start with one of the most important fundamentals of salesmanship, namely motive. In the first letter, it is obvious that the motive is entirely one of self-interest. The letter states exactly what is wanted, but the wording of it leaves a doubt as to why the request is made or whom it is intended to benefit. Study the sentence in the second paragraph. This will be a big favor to me personally, and so on. Now, it may seem to be a peculiar trait, but the truth is that most people will not grant favors just to please others. If I ask you to render a service that will benefit me without bringing you some corresponding advantage, you will not show much enthusiasm in granting that favor. You may refuse altogether if you have a plausible excuse for refusing. But if I ask you to render a service that will benefit a third person, even though the service must be rendered through me, and if that service is of such a nature that it is likely to reflect credit on you, the chances are that you will render the service willingly. We see this psychology demonstrated by the man who pitches a dime to the beggar on the street, or perhaps refuses even the dime, but willingly hands over $100 or $1,000 to the charity worker who is begging in the name of others. But the most damaging suggestion of all is contained in the last and most important paragraph of the letter, thanking you in advance for any consideration you may care to show me. This sentence strongly suggests that the writer of the letter anticipates a refusal of his request. It clearly indicates lack of enthusiasm. It paves the way for a refusal of the request. There is not one single word in the entire letter that places in the mind of a man to whom it is sent a satisfactory reason why he should comply with the request. On the other hand, he can clearly see that the object of the letter is to secure from him a letter of endorsement that will help sell the book. The most important selling argument, in fact, the only selling argument available in connection with this request, has been lost because it was not brought out and established as the real motive for making the request. This argument was but faintly mentioned in the sentence. I believe those who purchase the book would welcome the opportunity of receiving a message from you as to the best method of marketing personal services. The opening paragraph of the letter violates an important fundamental of salesmanship because it clearly suggests that the object of the letter is to gain some advantage for its writer, and does not even hint at any corresponding advantage that may accrue to the person to whom it is sent. Instead of neutralizing the mind of the recipient of the letter, as it should do, it has just the opposite effect. It causes him to close his mind against all argument that follows. It puts him in a frame of mind that makes it easy for him to say no. It reminds me of a salesman, or perhaps I should say, a man who wanted to be a salesman, who once approached me for the purpose of selling me a subscription to the Saturday Evening Post. As he held a copy of the magazine in front of me, he suggested the answer I should make by this question. You wouldn't subscribe for the Post to help me out, would you? Of course I said no. He had made it easy for me to say no. There was no enthusiasm back of his words, and gloom and discouragement were written all over his face. He needed the commission he would have made on my subscription had I purchased. No doubt about that, but he suggested nothing that appealed to my self-interest motive, therefore he lost a sale. But the loss of this one sale was not the sad part of his misfortune. The sad part was that this same attitude was causing him to lose all other sales which he might have made had he changed his approach. A few weeks later, another subscription agent approached me. She was selling a combination of 6 magazines, one of which was the Saturday Evening Post, but how different was her approach. She glanced at my library table, on which she saw several magazines, then at my bookshelves, and exclaimed with enthusiasm, "Oh, I see you are a lover of books and magazines." I proudly pleaded guilty to the charge. Observe the word proudly, for it has an important bearing on this incident. I laid down the manuscript that I was reading when this saleswoman came in, for I could see that she was a woman of intelligence. Just how I came to see this I will leave to your imagination. The important point is that I laid down the manuscript and actually felt myself wanting to hear what she had to say. With the aid of 11 words, plus a pleasant smile, plus a tone of genuine enthusiasm, she had neutralized my mind sufficiently to make me want to hear her. She had performed her most difficult task with those few words, because I had made up my mind when she was announced that I would keep my manuscript in my hands and thereby convey to her mind, as politely as I could, the fact that I was busy and did not wish to be detained. Being a student of salesmanship and of suggestion, I carefully watched to see what her next move would be. She had a bundle of magazines under her arm, and I expected she would unroll it and begin to urge me to purchase, but she didn't. You will recall that I said she was selling a combination of 6 magazines, not merely trying to sell them. First impressions really do count. Dress to look the part you intend to play in life, but take care not to overdo it. She walked over to my bookshelves, pulled out a copy of Emerson's essays, and for the next 10 minutes she talked about Emerson's essay on compensation, so interestingly that I lost sight of the roll of magazines that she carried. She was neutralizing my mind some more. Incidentally, she gave me a sufficient number of new ideas about Emerson's works to provide material for an excellent editorial. Then she asked me which magazines I received regularly, and after I told her, she smiled as she began to unroll her bundle of magazines and laid them on the table in front of me. She analyzed her magazines one by one and explained just why I should have each of them. The Saturday Evening Post would bring me the cleanest fiction. Literary Digest would bring me the news of the world in condensed form, such as a busy man like myself would demand. The American Magazine would bring me the latest biographies of the men who were leading in business and industry, and so on, until she had covered the entire list. But I was not responding to her argument as freely as she thought I should have, so she slipped me this gentle suggestion. A man of your position is bound to be well informed, and if he isn't, it will show up in his own work. She spoke the truth. Her remark was both a compliment and a gentle reprimand. She made me feel somewhat sheepish because she had taken inventory of my reading matter, and 6 of the leading magazines were not on my list. The 6 that she was selling. Then I began to slip by asking her how much the 6 magazines would cost. She put on the finishing touches of a well-presented sales talk by this tactful reply: the cost. Why, the cost of the entire number is less than you receive for a single page of the typewritten manuscript that you had in your hands when I came in. Again, she spoke the truth. And how did she happen to guess so well what I was getting for my manuscript? The answer is, she didn't guess, she knew. She made it a part of her business to draw me out tactfully as to the nature of my work, which in no way made me angry. She became so deeply interested in the manuscript which I had laid down when she came in, that she actually induced me to talk about it. I am no saying, of course, that this required any great amount of skill or coaxing, for have I not said that it was my manuscript? In my remarks about that manuscript, I suspect I admitted that I was receiving $250 for the 15 pages. Yes, I am sure I was careless enough to admit that I was being well paid for my work. Perhaps she induced me to make the admission. At any rate, the information was valuable to her, and she made effective use of it at the psychological moment. For all I know, it was a part of her plan to observe carefully all that she saw and heard, with the object of finding out just what my weaknesses were and what I was most interested in discussing. Some salesmen take the time to do this, some do not. She was one of those who did. Yes, she went away with my order for the 6 magazines, also my $12. But that was not all the benefit she derived from tactful suggestion plus enthusiasm. She got my consent to canvass my office, and before she left, she had 5 other orders from my employees. At no time during her stay did she leave the impression that I was favoring her by purchasing her magazines. Just to the contrary, she distinctly impressed me with the feeling that she was rendering me a favor. This was tactful suggestion. Before we get away from this incident, I wish to make an admission. When she drew me into conversation, she did it in such a way that I talked with enthusiasm. There were 2 reasons for this. She was one of them, and the other one was the fact that she managed to get me to talk about my own work. Of course, I am not suggesting that you should be meddlesome enough to smile at my carelessness as you read this, or that you should gather from this incident the impression that this tactful saleswoman actually led me to talk of my own work for the purpose of neutralizing my mind so that I would listen to her, when she was ready to talk of her magazines, as patiently as she had listened to me. However, if you should be clever enough to draw a lesson from her method, there is no way for me to stop you from doing so. As I have stated, when I talked I mixed enthusiasm with my conversation. Perhaps I caught the spirit of enthusiasm from this clever saleswoman when she made that opening remark as she came into my study. Yes, I am sure this is where I caught it, and I am just as sure that her enthusiasm was not a matter of accident. She had trained herself to look for something in her prospective purchaser's office, or his work, or his conversation, over which she could express enthusiasm. Remember, suggestion and enthusiasm go hand in hand. I can remember, as though it were yesterday, the feeling that came over me when that would-be salesman pushed that Saturday Evening Post in front of me, as he remarked, "You wouldn't subscribe for the Post to help me out, would you?" His words were chilled, they were lifeless. They lacked enthusiasm, they registered an impression in my mind, but that impression was one of coldness. I wanted to see the man go out at the door at which he had come in. Mind you, I am not naturally unsympathetic, but the tone of his voice, the look on his face, his general bearing suggested that he was there to ask a favor and not to offer one. Suggestion is one of the most subtle and powerful principles of psychology. You are making use of it in all that you do and say and think, but unless you understand the difference between negative suggestion and positive suggestion, you may be using it in such a way that it is bringing you defeat instead of success. Science has established the fact that through the negative use of suggestion, life may be extinguished. Some years ago in France, a criminal was condemned to death, but before the time for his execution, an experiment was performed on him which conclusively proved that through the principle of suggestion death could be produced. The criminal was brought to the guillotine and his head was placed under the knife, after he had been blindfolded. A heavy, sharp-edged plank was then dropped on his neck, producing a shock similar to that of a sharp-edged knife. Warm water was then gently poured on his neck and allowed to trickle slowly down his spine to imitate the flow of warm blood. In 7 minutes, the doctors pronounced the man dead. His imagination, through the principle of suggestion, had actually turned the sharp-edged plank into a guillotine blade and stopped his heart from beating. In the little town where I was raised, there lived an old lady who constantly complained that she feared death from cancer. During her childhood, she had seen a woman who had cancer, and the sight had so impressed itself upon her mind that she began to look for the symptoms of cancer in her own body. She was sure that every little ache and pain was the beginning of her long-looked-for symptom of cancer. I have seen her place her hand on her breast and have heard her exclaim, "Oh, I am sure I have a cancer growing here." I can feel it. When complaining of this imaginary disease, she always placed her hand on her left breast, where she believed the cancer was attacking her. For more than 20 years she kept this up. A few weeks ago she died with cancer on her left breast. If suggestion will actually turn the edge of a plank into a guillotine blade and transform healthy body cells into parasites out of which cancer will develop, can you not imagine what it will do in destroying disease germs, if properly directed? Suggestion is the law through which mental healers work what appear to be miracles. I have personally witnessed the removal of parasitical growths known as half the wrecks that strew life's ocean. If some star had been their guide, might in safety now be riding, but they drifted with the tide. Warts through the aid of suggestion within 48 hours. You, the reader of this lesson, can be sent to bed with imaginary sickness of the worst sort in 2 hours' time or less through the use of suggestion. If you should start down the street, and 3 or 4 people in whom you had confidence should meet you, and each exclaim that you look ill, you would be ready for a doctor. This brings to mind an experience that I once had with a life insurance salesman. I had made application for a policy, but was undecided as to whether I would take $10,000 or $20,000. Meanwhile, the agent had sent me to the life insurance company's doctor to be examined. The following day I was called back for another examination. The second time the examination was more searching, and the doctor carried a worried look on his face. The third day I was called back again, and this time 2 consulting physicians were there to look me over. They gave me the most searching examination I had ever received or even heard of. The next day the agent called on me and addressed me as follows: "I do not wish to alarm you, but the doctors who examined you do not agree on your analysis. You have not yet decided whether you will take $10,000 or $20,000 worth of insurance, and I do not think it fair for me to give you a report on your medical examination until you make this decision, because if I did you might feel that I was urging you to take the larger amount." Then I spoke up and said, "Well, I have already decided to take the full amount." True enough, I had decided to take the full $20,000 policy. I decided the moment the agent planted the suggestion in my mind that perhaps I had some constitutional weakness that would make it hard for me to get as much insurance as I wanted. "Very well," said the agent. "Now that you have decided, I feel it my duty to tell you that 2 of the doctors believe you have the tubercular germ in your system, while the other 2 disagree with them." The trick had been turned. Clever suggestion had pushed me over the fence of indecision, and we were all satisfied. Where does enthusiasm come in, do you ask? Never mind, it came in all right, but if you wish to know who brought it, you will have to ask the life insurance agent and his 4 medical accomplices, for I am sure they must have had a hearty laugh at my expense. But the trick was all right. I needed the insurance anyway. Of course, if you happen to be a life insurance agent, you will not grab this idea and work it out on the next prospective client who is slow in making up his mind about taking a policy. Of course you will not. A few months ago, I received one of the most effective pieces of advertising I ever saw. It was a neat little book in which a clever automobile insurance salesman had reprinted press dispatches that he had gathered from all over the country, in which it was shown that 65 automobiles had been stolen in a single day. On the back page of the book was this highly suggestive statement: "Your car may be the next one to go. Is it insured?" At the bottom of the page was the salesman's name and address, also his telephone number. Before I had finished reading the first 2 pages of the book, I called the salesman on the telephone and made inquiry about rates. He came right over to see me, and you know the remainder of the story. Go back now to the 2 letters and let us analyze the second one, which brought the desired replies from all to whom it was sent. Study carefully the first paragraph and you will observe that it asks a question which can be answered in but one way. Compare this opening paragraph with that of the first letter by asking yourself which of the 2 would have impressed you most favorably. This paragraph is worded as it is for a 2-fold purpose. First, it is intended to serve the purpose of neutralizing the mind of the reader, so he will read the remainder of the letter in an open-minded attitude. And second, it asks a question which can be answered in but one way, for the purpose of committing the reader to a viewpoint which harmonizes with the nature of the service that he is to be requested to render in subsequent paragraphs of the letter. In the second lesson of this course, you observed that Andrew Carnegie refused to answer my question when I asked him to what he attributed his success, until he had asked me to define the word success. He did this to avoid misunderstanding. The first paragraph of the letter we are analyzing is so worded that it states the object of the letter, and at the same time practically forces the reader to accept that object as being sound and reasonable. Any person who would answer the question asked in this paragraph of the letter under discussion in the negative would, by the same answer, convict himself on the charge of selfishness, and no man wants to face himself with a guilty conscience on such a charge. Just as the farmer first plows his ground, then fertilizes it, and perhaps harrows it and prepares it to receive the seed, in order that he may be sure of a crop, so does this paragraph fertilize the mind of the reader and prepare it for the seed which is to be placed there through the subtle suggestion that the paragraph contains. Study carefully the second paragraph of the letter and you will observe that it carries a statement of fact which the reader can neither question nor deny. It provides him with no reason for argument because it is obviously based upon a sound fundamental. It takes him the second step of the psychological journey that leads straight toward compliance with the request that is carefully clothed and covered up in the third paragraph of the letter. But you will notice that the third paragraph begins by paying the reader a nice little compliment that was not designed to make him angry. Therefore, if you will write me of your views as to the most essential points to be borne in mind by those who are offering personal services for sale, and so on. Study the wording of this sentence together with the setting in which it has been placed, and you will observe that it hardly appears to be a request at all, and certainly there is nothing about it to suggest that the writer of the letter is requesting a favor for his personal benefit. At most, it can be construed merely as a request for a favor for others. Now study the closing paragraph and notice how tactfully concealed is the suggestion that if the reader should refuse the request, he is placing himself in the awkward position of one who does not care enough about those who are less fortunate than himself to spend a 2-cent stamp and a few minutes of time for their benefit. From start to finish, the letter conveys its strongest impressions by mere suggestion, yet this suggestion is so carefully covered that it is not obvious except upon careful analysis of the entire letter. The whole construction of the letter is such that if the reader lays it aside without complying with the request it makes, he will have to reckon with his own conscience. This effect is intensified by the last sentence of the last paragraph, and especially by the last 13 words of that sentence. Who will read your message, believe in it, and be guided by it. This letter brings the reader up with a bang and turns his own conscience into an ally of the writer. It corners him, just as a hunter might corner a rabbit by driving it into a carefully prepared net. The best evidence that this analysis is correct is the fact that the letter brought replies from every person to whom it was sent, despite the fact that every one of these men was of the type that we speak of as being a man of affairs, the type that is generally supposed to be too busy to answer a letter of this nature. Not only did the letter bring the desired replies, but the men to whom it was sent replied in person, with the exception of the late Theodore Roosevelt, who replied under the signature of a secretary, John Wanamaker and Frank A. Vanderlip wrote 2 of the finest letters I have ever read. Each Amma's conceit is a fog which envelops a man's real character beyond his own recognition. It weakens his native ability and strengthens all his inconsistencies. Turpice that might well have adorned the pages of a more dignified volume than the one for which the letters were requested. Andrew Carnegie also wrote a letter that was well worth consideration by all who have personal services for sale. William Jennings Bryan wrote a fine letter, as did also the late Lord Northcliffe. None of these men wrote merely to please me, for I was unknown to all of them, with the exception of 4. They did not write to please me, they wrote to please themselves and to render a worthy service. Perhaps the wording of the letter had something to do with this, but as to that, I make no point other than to state that all of these men whom I have mentioned, and most others of their type, are generally the most willing men to render service for others when they are properly approached. I wish to take advantage of this appropriate opportunity to state that all of the really big men whom I have had the pleasure of knowing have been the most willing and courteous men of my acquaintance when it came to rendering service that was of benefit to others. Perhaps that was one reason why they were really big men. The human mind is a marvelous piece of machinery. One of its outstanding characteristics is noticed in the fact that all impressions which reach it, either through outside suggestion or autosuggestion, are recorded together in groups which harmonize in nature. The negative impressions are stored away, all in one portion of the brain, while the positive impressions are stored in another portion. When one of these impressions or past experiences is called into the conscious mind through the principle of memory, there is a tendency to recall with it all others of a similar nature, just as the raising of one link of a chain brings up other links with it. For example, anything that causes a feeling of doubt to arise in a person's mind is sufficient to call forth all of his experiences which caused him to become doubtful. If a man is asked by a stranger to cash a check, immediately he remembers having cashed checks that were not good or of having heard of others who did so. Through the law of association, all similar emotions, experiences, and sense impressions that reach the mind are filed away together, so that the recalling of one has a tendency to bring back to memory all the others. To arouse a feeling of distrust in a person's mind has a tendency to bring to the surface every doubt-building experience that person ever had. For this reason, successful salesmen endeavor to keep away from the discussion of subjects that may arouse the buyer's chain of doubt impressions, which he has stored away by reason of previous experiences. The successful salesman quickly learns that knocking a competitor or a competing article may result in bringing to the buyer's mind certain negative emotions growing out of previous experiences, which may make it impossible for the salesman to neutralize the buyer's mind. This principle applies to and controls every sense impression that is lodged in the human mind. Take the feeling of fear, for example. The moment we permit a single emotion that is related to fear to reach the conscious mind, it calls with it all of its unsavory relations. A feeling of courage cannot claim the attention of the conscious mind while a feeling of fear is there. One or the other must dominate. They make poor roommates because they do not harmonize in nature, like attracts like. Every thought held in the conscious mind has a tendency to draw to it other thoughts of a similar nature. You see, therefore, that these feelings, thoughts, and emotions growing out of past experiences, which claim the attention of the conscious mind, are backed by a regular army of supporting soldiers of a similar nature that stand ready to aid them in their work. Deliberately place in your own mind, through the principle of autosuggestion, the ambition to succeed through the aid of a definite chief aim, and notice how quickly all of your latent or undeveloped ability in the nature of past experiences will become stimulated and aroused to action in your behalf. Plant in a boy's mind, through the principle of suggestion, the ambition to become a successful lawyer or doctor or engineer or businessman or financier, and if you plant that suggestion deeply enough and keep it there, by repetition, it will begin to move that boy toward the achievement of the object of that ambition. If you would plant a suggestion deeply, mix it generously with enthusiasm, for enthusiasm is the fertilizer that will ensure its rapid growth as well as its permanency. When that kind-hearted old gentleman planted in my mind the suggestion that I was a bright boy and that I could make my mark in the world if I would educate myself, it was not so much what he said as it was the way in which he said it that made such a deep and lasting impression on my mind. It was the way in which he gripped my shoulders and the look of confidence in his eyes that drove his suggestion so deeply into my subconscious mind that it never gave me any peace until I commenced taking the steps that led to the fulfillment of the suggestion. This is a point that I would stress with all the power at my command. It is not so much what you say as it is the tone and manner in which you say it that makes a lasting impression. It naturally follows, therefore, that sincerity of purpose, honesty, and earnestness must be placed back of all that one says if one would make a lasting and favorable impression. Whatever you successfully sell to others, you must first sell to yourself. Not long ago, I was approached by an agent of the government of Mexico who sought my services as a writer of propaganda for the administration in charge at that time. His approach was about as follows. Whereas Senner has a reputation as an exponent of the Golden Rule philosophy, and whereas Senner is known throughout the United States as an independent who is not allied with any political faction now. Therefore, would Senner be gracious enough to come to Mexico, study the economic and political affairs of that country, then return to the United States and write a series of articles to appear in the newspapers, recommending to the people of America the immediate recognition of Mexico by the government of the United States, and so on. For this service, I was offered more money than I shall, perhaps, ever possess during my entire life. But I refused the commission, and for a reason that will fail to impress anyone except those who understand the principle which makes it necessary for all who would influence others to remain on good terms with their own conscience. I could not write convincingly of Mexico's cause for the reason that I did not believe in that cause. Therefore, I could not have mixed sufficient enthusiasm with my writing to have made it effective, even though I had been willing to prostitute my talent and dip my pen into ink that I knew to be muddy. I will not endeavor further to explain my philosophy on this incident for the reason that those who are far enough advanced in the study of autosuggestion will not need further explanation, while those who are not far enough advanced would not and could not understand. No man can afford to express, through words or acts, that which is not in harmony with his own belief, and if he does so, he must pay by the loss of his ability to influence others. Please read aloud the foregoing paragraph. It is worth emphasizing by repetition, for lack of observation of the principle upon which it is based constitutes the rocks and reefs upon which many a man's definite chief aim dashes itself to pieces. I do not believe that I can afford to try to deceive anyone about anything, but I know that I cannot afford to try to deceive myself. To do so would destroy the power of my pen and render my words ineffective. It is only when I write with the fire of enthusiasm burning in my heart that my writing impresses others favorably. And it is only when I speak from a heart that is bursting with belief in my message that I can move my audience to accept that message. Is there not food for thought in the fact that no newspaper has ever published any account of wild drinking parties or other similar scandals in connection with the names of Edison, Ford, Rockefeller, and most of the other really big fellows? I would also have you read aloud the foregoing paragraph. Yes, I would have you commit it to memory. Even more than this, I would have you write it out and place it where it may serve as a daily reminder of a principle. Nay, a law as immutable as the law of gravitation, without which you can never become a power in your chosen life work. There have been times, and many of them, when it appeared that if I stood by this principle it would mean starvation. There have been times when my closest friends and business advisors have strongly urged me to shade my philosophy for the sake of gaining a needed advantage here and there. But somehow I have managed to cling to it mainly, I suppose, for the reason that I have preferred peace and harmony in my own heart to the material gain that I might have had by a forced compromise with my conscience. Strange as it may seem, my deliberations and conclusions on this subject of refusing to strangle my own conscience have seldom been based upon what is commonly called honesty. That which I have done in the matter of refraining from writing or speaking anything that I did not believe has been solely a question of honor between my conscience and myself. I have tried to express that which my heart dictated because I have aimed to give my words flesh. It might be said that my motive was based more upon self-interest than it was on a desire to be fair with others, although I have never desired to be unfair with others, so far as I am able to analyze myself. No man can become a master salesman if he compromises with falsehood. Murder will out, and even though no one ever catches him red-handed in expressing that which he does not believe, his words will fail in the accomplishment of their purpose because he cannot give them flesh if they do not come from his heart, and if they are not mixed with genuine, unadulterated enthusiasm. I would also have you read aloud the foregoing paragraph, for it embraces a great law that you must understand and apply before you can become a person of influence in any undertaking. In making these requests for the sake of emphasis, I am not trying to take undue liberties with you. I am giving you full credit for being an adult, a thinker, an intelligent person, yet I know how likely you are to skip over these vital laws without being sufficiently impressed by them to make them a part of your own workaday philosophy. I know your weakness because I know my own. It has required the better part of 25 years of ups and downs, mostly downs, to impress these basic truths upon my own mind so that they influenced me. I have tried both them and their opposites, therefore I can speak, not as one who merely believes in their soundness, but as one who knows. And what do I mean by these truths? So that you cannot possibly misunderstand my meaning, and so that these words of warning cannot possibly convey an abstract meaning, I will state that by these truths I mean this. You cannot afford to suggest to another person, by word of mouth or by an act of yours, that which you do not believe. Surely that is plain enough. And the reason you cannot afford to do so is this: if you compromise with your own conscience, it will not be long before you will have no conscience. For your conscience will fail to guide you, just as an alarm clock will fail to awaken you if you do not heed it. Surely that is plain enough also. And how do I happen to be an authority on this vital subject, do you ask? I am an authority because I have experimented with the principle until I know how it works. But, you may ask, how do I know that you are telling the truth? The answer is that you will know only by experimenting for yourself, and by observing others who faithfully apply this principle, and those who do not apply it. If my evidence needs backing, then consult any man whom you know to be a person who has tried to get by without observing this principle, and if he will not or cannot give you the truth, you can get it, nevertheless, by analyzing the man. There is but one thing in the world that gives a man real and enduring power, and that is character. Reputation, bear in mind, is not character. Reputation is that which people are believed to be. Character is that which people are. If you would be a person of great influence, then be a person of real character. Character is the philosopher's lodestone through which all who have it may turn the base metals of their life into pure gold. Without character you have nothing, you are nothing. And you can be nothing except a pile of flesh and bone and hair, worth perhaps $25. Character is something that you cannot beg or steal or buy. You can get it only by building it, and you can build it by your own thoughts and deeds, and in no other way. Through the aid of autosuggestion, any person can build a sound character, no matter what his past has been. As a fitting close for this lesson, I wish to emphasize the fact that all who have character have enthusiasm and personality sufficient to draw to them others who have character. You will now be instructed as to how you shall proceed in developing enthusiasm in the event that you do not already possess this rare quality. The instructions will be simple, but you will be unfortunate if you discount their value on that account. First, complete the remaining lessons of this course, because other important instructions which are to be coordinated with this one will be found in subsequent lessons. Second, if you have not already done so, write out your definite chief aim in clear, simple language, and follow this by writing out the plan through which you intend to transform your aim into reality. Third, read over the description of your definite chief aim each night, just before retiring, and as you read, see yourself, in your imagination, in full possession of the object of your aim. Do this with full faith in your ability to transform your definite chief aim into reality. Read aloud with all the enthusiasm at your command, emphasizing every word. Repeat this reading until the small, still voice within you tells you that your purpose will be realized. Sometimes you will feel the effects of this voice from within the first time you read your definite chief aim, while at other times you may have to read it a dozen or 50 times before the assurance comes, but do not stop until you feel it. If you prefer to do so, you may read your definite chief aim as a prayer. The remainder of this lesson is for the person who has not yet learned the power of faith and who knows little or nothing of the principle of autosuggestion. To all who are in this class, I would recommend the reading of the 7th and 8th verses of the 7th chapter and the 20th verse of the 17th chapter of St. Matthew. One of the greatest powers for good upon the face of this earth is faith. To this marvelous power may be traced miracles of the most astounding nature. It offers peace on earth to all who embrace it. Faith involves a principle that is so far-reaching in its effect that no man can say what are its limitations, or if it has limitations. Write into the description of your definite chief aim a statement of the qualities that you intend to develop in yourself, and the station in life that you intend to attain, and have faith, as you read this description each night, that you can transform this purpose into reality. Surely you cannot miss the suggestion contained in this lesson. To become successful, you must be a person of action. Merely to know is not sufficient. It is necessary both to know and do. Enthusiasm is the mainspring of the mind which urges one to put knowledge into action. Billy Sunday is the most successful evangelist this country has ever known. For the purpose of study, if you think your lot in life has been hard, read Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington, and you may see how fortunate you have been. In his technique and checking up on his psychological methods, the author of this course went through 3 campaigns with Reverend Sunday. His success is based very largely upon one word: enthusiasm. By making effective use of the law of suggestion, Billy Sunday conveys his own spirit of enthusiasm to the minds of his followers, and they become influenced by it. He sells his sermons by the use of exactly the same sort of strategy employed by many master salesmen. Enthusiasm is as essential to a salesman as water is to a duck. All successful sales managers understand the psychology of enthusiasm and make use of it in various ways as a practical means of helping their men produce more sales. Practically all sales organizations have get-together meetings at stated times for the purpose of revitalizing the minds of all members of the sales force and injecting the spirit of enthusiasm, which can be best done en masse through group psychology. Sales meetings might properly be called revival meetings because their purpose is to revive interest and arouse enthusiasm, which will enable the salesman to take up the fight with renewed ambition and energy. During his administration as sales manager of the National Cash Register Company, Hugh Chalmers, who later became famous in the motor car industry, faced a most embarrassing situation which threatened to wipe out his position as well as that of thousands of salesmen under his direction. The company was in financial difficulty. This fact had become known to the salesmen in the field, and the effect of it was to cause them to lose their enthusiasm. Sales began to dwindle until finally the conditions became so alarming that a general meeting of the sales organization was called to be held at the company's plant in Dayton, Ohio. Salesmen were called in from all over the country. Mr. Chalmers presided over the meeting. He began by calling on several of his best salesmen to get on their feet and tell what was wrong out in the field, that orders had fallen off. One by one they got up as called, and each man had a most terrible tale of grief to unfold. Business conditions were bad, money was scarce, people were holding off buying until after presidential election, and so on. As the 5th man began to enumerate the difficulties which had kept him from making his usual quota of sales, Mr. Chalmers jumped up on top of a table, held up his hands for silence, and said, "Stop. I order this convention to come to a close for 10 minutes while I get my shoes shined." Then turning to a small colored boy who sat nearby, he ordered the boy to bring his shoeshine outfit and shine his shoes right where he stood on top of the table. The salesmen in the audience were astounded. Some of them thought that Mr. Chalmers had suddenly lost his mind. They began to whisper among themselves. Meanwhile, the little colored boy shined first one and then the other shoe, taking plenty of time and doing a first-class job. After the job was finished, Mr. Chalmers handed the boy a dime, then went ahead with his speech. "I want each of you," said he, "to take a good look at this little colored boy. He has the concession for shoe shining throughout our plant and offices." His predecessor was a white boy, considerably older than himself, and despite the fact that the company subsidized him with a salary of $5 a week, he could not make a living in this plant, where thousands of people are employed. This little colored boy not only makes a good living without any subsidy from the company, but he is actually saving money out of his earnings each week, working under the same conditions in the same plant for the same people. Now I wish to ask you a question. Whose fault was it that the white boy did not get more business? Was it his fault or the fault of his buyers? In a mighty roar from the crowd, the answer came back. It was the boy's fault, of course. Just so, replied Chalmers, and now I want to tell you this, that you are selling cash registers in the same territory, to the same people, with exactly the same business conditions that existed a year ago, yet you are not producing the business that you were then. Now whose fault is that? Is it yours or the buyer's? And again the answer came back with a roar. It is our fault, of course. I am glad that you are frank to acknowledge your faults, Chalmers continued, and I now wish to tell you what your trouble is. You have heard rumors about this company being in financial trouble, and that has killed off your enthusiasm, so that you are not making the effort that you formerly made. If you will go back into your territories with a definite promise to send in 5 orders each during the next 30 days, this company will no longer be in financial difficulty, for that additional business will see us clear. Will you do it? They said they would, and they did. That incident has gone down in the history of the National Cash Register Company under the name of Hugh Chalmers' $1 million shoe shine, for it is said that this turned the tide in the company's affairs and was worth millions of dollars. Enthusiasm knows no defeat. The sales manager who knows how to send out an army of enthusiastic salespeople may set his own price on his services, and what is more important even than this, he can increase the earning capacity of every person under his direction. Thus, his enthusiasm benefits not only himself, but perhaps hundreds of others. Enthusiasm is never a matter of chance. There are certain stimuli which produce enthusiasm, the most important of these being as follows: occupation in work which one loves best, environment where one comes in contact with others who are enthusiastic and optimistic, financial success, complete mastery and application in one's daily work of the 15 laws of success, good health, knowledge that one has served others in some helpful manner, good clothes appropriate to the needs of one's occupation. All of these 7 sources of stimuli are self-explanatory with the exception of the last. The psychology of clothes is understood by very few people, and for this reason it will be here explained in detail. Clothes constitute the most important part of the embellishment which every person must have in order to feel self-reliant, hopeful, and enthusiastic. The psychology of good clothes when the good news came from the theater of war, on November the 11th, 191 my worldly possessions amounted to but little more than they did the day I came into the world. The war had destroyed my business and made it necessary for me to make a new start. My wardrobe consisted of 3 well-worn business suits and 2 uniforms which I no longer needed. Knowing all too well that the world forms its first and most lasting impressions of a man by the clothes he wears, I lost no time in visiting my tailor. Happily, my tailor had known me for many years, therefore he did not judge me entirely by the clothes I wore. If he had, I would have been sunk. With less than $1 in change in my pocket, I picked out the cloth for 3 of the most expensive suits I ever owned, and ordered that they be made up for me at once. The 3 suits came to $375. I shall never forget the remark made by the tailor as he took my measure. Glancing first at the 3 bolts of expensive cloth which I had selected, and then at me, he inquired, $1 a year man, eh? All anyone really requires, as a capital on which to start a successful career, is a sound mind, a healthy body, and a genuine desire to be of as much service as possible to as many people as possible. No, said I, if I had been fortunate enough to get on the $1 a year payroll, I might now have enough money to pay for these suits. The tailor looked at me with surprise. I don't think he got the joke. One of the suits was a beautiful dark gray, one was a dark blue, the other was a light blue with a pinstripe. Fortunately, I was in good standing with my tailor, therefore he did not ask when I was going to pay for those expensive suits. I knew that I could and would pay for them in due time, but could I have convinced him of that? This was the thought which was running through my mind, with hope against hope that the question would not be brought up. I then visited my haberdasher, from whom I purchased 3 less expensive suits and a complete supply of the best shirts, collars, ties, hosiery, and underwear that he carried. My bill at the haberdasher's amounted to a little over $300. With an air of prosperity, I nonchalantly signed the charged ticket and tossed it back to the salesman, with instructions to deliver my purchase the following morning. The feeling of renewed self-reliance and success had begun to come over me, even before I had attired myself in my newly purchased outfit. I was out of the war and $675 in debt, all in less than 24 hours. The following day, the first of the 3 suits ordered from the haberdasher was delivered. I put it on at once, stuffed a new silk handkerchief in the outside pocket of my coat, shoved the $50 I had borrowed on my ring down into my pants pocket, and walked down Michigan Boulevard in Chicago, feeling as rich as Rockefeller. Every article of clothing I wore, from my underwear out, was of the very best. That it was not paid for was nobody's business except mine and my tailor's and my haberdasher's. Every morning I dressed myself in an entirely new outfit and walked down the same street at precisely the same hour. That hour happened to be the time when a certain wealthy publisher usually walked down the same street on his way to lunch. I made it my business to speak to him each day, and occasionally I would stop for a minute's chat with him. After this daily meeting had been going on for about a week, I met this publisher one day, but decided I would see if he would let me get by without speaking. Watching him from under my eyelashes, I looked straight ahead and started to pass him when he stopped and motioned me over to the edge of the sidewalk, placed his hand on my shoulder, looked me over from head to foot, and said, "You look damned prosperous for a man who has just laid aside a uniform." "Who makes your clothes?" "Well," said I, "Wilkie and Celery made this particular suit." He then wanted to know what sort of business I was engaged in. That airy atmosphere of prosperity which I had been wearing, along with a new and different suit every day, had got the better of his curiosity. I had hoped that it would. Flipping the ashes from my Havana Perfecto, I said, "Oh, I am preparing the copy for a new magazine that I am going to publish." "A new magazine, eh?" he queried, "and what are you going to call it?" "It is to be named Hill's Golden Rule." "Don't forget," said my publisher friend, "that I am in the business of printing and distributing magazines. Perhaps I can serve you also." That was the moment for which I had been waiting. I had that very moment, and almost the very spot of ground on which we stood, in mind when I was purchasing those new suits. But is it necessary to remind you that conversation never would have taken place had this publisher observed me walking down that street from day to day, with a whipped dog look on my face, an unpressed suit on my back, and a look of poverty in my eyes? An appearance of prosperity attracts attention always, with no exceptions whatsoever. Moreover, a look of prosperity attracts favorable attention, because the one dominating desire in every human heart is to be prosperous. My publisher friend invited me to his club for lunch. Before the coffee and cigars had been served, he had talked me out of the contract for printing and distributing my magazine. I had even consented to permit him to supply the capital without any interest charge. For the benefit of those who are not familiar with the publishing business, may I not offer the information that considerable capital is required for launching a new nationally distributed magazine. Capital in such large amounts is often hard to get, even with the best of security. The capital necessary for launching Hill's Golden Rule magazine, which you may have read, was well above $30,000, and every cent of it was raised on a front created mostly by good clothes. True, there may have been some ability back of those clothes, but many millions of men have ability who never have anything else, and who are never heard of outside of the limited community in which they live. This is a rather sad truth. To some it may seem an unpardonable extravagance for one who was broke to have gone in debt for $675 worth of clothes, but the psychology back of that investment more than justified it. The appearance of prosperity not only made a favorable impression on those to whom I had to look for favors, but of more importance still was the effect that proper attire had on me. I not only knew that correct clothes would impress others favorably, but I knew also that good clothes would give me an atmosphere of self-reliance, without which I could not hope to regain my lost fortunes. I got my first training in the psychology of good clothes from my friend Edwin C. Barnes, who is a close business associate of Thomas A. Edison. Barnes afforded considerable amusement for the Edison staff when some 20-odd years ago he rode into West Orange on a freight train, not being able to raise sufficient money for passenger fare, and announced at the Edison offices that he had come to enter into a partnership with Mr. Edison. Nearly everybody around the Edison plant laughed at Barnes, except Edison himself. He saw something in the square jaw and determined face of young Barnes which most of the others did not see, despite the fact that the young man looked more like a tramp than he did a future partner of the greatest inventor on earth. Barnes got his start sweeping floors in the Edison offices. That was all he sought, just a chance to get a toehold in the Edison organization. From there on he made history that is well worth emulation by other young men who wish to make places for themselves. Barnes has now retired from active business, even though he is still a comparatively young man, and spends most of his time at his two beautiful homes in Bradentown, Florida, and Damariscotta, Maine. He is a multimillionaire, prosperous and happy. I first became acquainted with Barnes during the early days of his association with Edison, before he had arrived. In those days, he had the largest and most expensive collection of clothes I had ever seen or heard of one man owning. His wardrobe consisted of 31 suits, one for each day of the month. He never wore the same suit 2 days in succession. Moreover, all his suits were of the most expensive type. Incidentally, his clothes were made by the same tailors who made those 3 suits for me. He wore socks which cost $6 per pair. There is a suitable reward for every virtue and appropriate punishment for every sin a man commits. Both the reward and the punishment are effects over which no man has control, as they come upon him voluntarily. His shirts and other wearing apparel cost in similar proportion. His cravats were specially made, at a cost of from $5 to $7.50 each. One day, in a spirit of fun, I asked him to save some of his old suits which he did not need for me. He informed me that he hadn't a single suit which he did not need. He then gave me a lesson on the psychology of clothes which is well worth remembering. "I do not wear 31 suits of clothes," said he, "entirely for the impression they make on other people. I do it mostly for the impression they have on me." Barnes then told me of the day when he presented himself at the Edison plant for a position. He said he had to walk around the plant a dozen times before he worked up enough courage to announce himself, because he knew that he looked more like a tramp than he did a desirable employee. Barnes is said to be the most able salesman ever connected with the great inventor of West Orange. His entire fortune was made through his ability as a salesman, but he has often said that he never could have accomplished the results which have made him both wealthy and famous had it not been for his understanding of the psychology of clothes. I have met many salesmen in my time. During the past 10 years, I have personally trained and directed the efforts of more than 3,000 salespeople, both men and women, and I have observed that, without a single exception, the star producers were all people who understood and made good use of the psychology of clothes. I have seen a few well-dressed people who made no outstanding records as salesmen, but I have yet to see the first poorly dressed man who became a star producer in the field of selling. I have studied the psychology of clothes for so long, and I have watched its effect on people in so many different walks of life, that I am fully convinced there is a close connection between clothes and success. Personally, I feel no need of 31 suits of clothes, but if my personality demanded a wardrobe of this size, I would manage to get it, no matter how much it might cost. To be well dressed, a man should have at least 10 suits of clothes. He should have a different suit for each of the 7 days of the week, a full dress suit and a tuxedo for formal evening occasions, and a cutaway for formal afternoon occasions. For summer wear, he should have an assortment of at least 4 appropriate light suits, with blue coat and white flannel trousers for informal afternoon and evening occasions. If he plays golf, he should have at least 1 golf suit. This, of course, is for the man who is a notch or 2 above the mediocre class. The man who is satisfied with mediocrity needs but few clothes. It may be true, as a well-known poet has said, that clothes do not make the man, but no one can deny the fact that good clothes go a very long way toward giving him a favorable start. A man's bank will generally loan him all the money he wants when he does not need it, when he is prosperous, but never go to your bank for a loan with a shabby-looking suit on your back and a look of poverty in your eyes, for if you do, you'll get the gate. Success attracts success. There is no escape from this great universal law. Therefore, if you wish to attract success, make sure that you look the part of success, whether your calling is that of day laborer or merchant prince. For the benefit of the more dignified students of this philosophy who may object to resorting to stunt, stimuli, or trick clothing as a means of achieving success, it may be profitably explained that practically every successful man on earth has discovered some form of stimulus through which he can and does drive himself on to greater effort. It may be shocking to members of the anti-saloon leg, but it is said to be true, nevertheless, that James Whitcomb Riley wrote his best poems when he was under the influence of alcohol. His stimulus was liquor. The author wishes it distinctly understood that he does not recommend the use of alcoholic or narcotic stimuli for any purpose whatsoever, as either will eventually destroy both body and mind of all who use them. Under the influence of alcohol, Riley became imaginative, enthusiastic, and an entirely different person, according to close personal friends of his. Edwin Barnes spurred himself into the necessary action to produce outstanding results with the aid of good clothes. Some men rise to great heights of achievement as the result of love for some woman. Connect this with the brief suggestion to the subject which was made in the introductory lesson, and you will, if you are a person who knows the ways of men, be able to finish the discussion of this particular phase of enthusiasm, stimulus, without further comment by the author which might not be appropriate for the younger minds that will assimilate this philosophy. Underworld characters who are engaged in the dangerous business of highway robbery, burglary, and so on, generally dope themselves for the occasion of their operations with cocaine, morphine, and other narcotics. Even in this there is a lesson which shows that practically all men need temporary or artificial stimuli to drive them to greater effort than that normally employed in the ordinary pursuits of life. Successful people have discovered ways and means which they believe best suited to their own needs, to produce stimuli which cause them to rise to heights of endeavor above the ordinary. One of the most successful writers in the world employs an orchestra of beautifully dressed young women who play for him while he writes. Seated in a room that has been artistically decorated to suit his own taste, under lights that have been colored, tinted, and softened, these beautiful young ladies, dressed in handsome evening gowns, play his favorite music. To use his own words, I become drunk with enthusiasm under the influence of this environment and rise to heights I never know or feel on other occasions. It is then that I do my work. The thoughts pour in on me as if they were dictated by an unseen and unknown power. This author gets much of his inspiration from music and art. Once a week he spends at least an hour in an art museum, looking at the works of the masters. On these occasions, again using his own words, I get enough enthusiasm from 1 hour's visit in the Museum of Art to carry me for 2 days. Edgar Allan Poe wrote The Raven when, it is reported, he was more than half intoxicated. Oscar Wilde wrote his poems under the influence of a form of stimulus which cannot be appropriately mentioned in a course of this nature. Henry Ford, so it is believed by this author, who admits that this is merely the author's opinion, got his real start as the result of his love for his charming life companion. It was she who inspired him, gave him faith in himself, and kept him keyed up so that he carried on in the face of adversities which would have killed off a dozen ordinary men. These incidents are cited as evidence that men of outstanding achievement have, by accident or design, discovered ways and means of stimulating themselves to a high state of enthusiasm. Associate that which has been here stated with what was said concerning the law of the master mind in the introductory lesson, and you will have an entirely new conception of the modus operandi through which that law may be applied. You will also have a somewhat different understanding of the real purpose of allied effort in a spirit of perfect harmony, which constitutes the best-known method of bringing into use the law of the master mind. Your employer does not control the sort of service you render. You control that, and it is the thing that makes or breaks you. At this point it seems appropriate to call your attention to the manner in which the lessons of this course blend. You will observe that each lesson covers the subject intended to be covered, and in addition to this, it overlaps and gives the student a better understanding of some other lesson or lessons of the course. In the light of what has been said in this lesson, for example, the student will better understand the real purpose of the law of the master mind, that purpose being, in the main, a practical method of stimulating the minds of all who participate in the group constituting the master mind. Times too numerous to be here described, this author has gone into conference with men whose faces showed the signs of care, who had the appearance of worry written all over them, only to see those same men straighten up their shoulders, tilt their chins at a higher angle, soften their faces with smiles of confidence, and get down to business with that sort of enthusiasm which knows no defeat. The change took place the moment harmony of purpose was established. If a man goes about the affairs of life in the same day in and day out, prosaic, lackadaisical spirit, devoid of enthusiasm, he is doomed to failure. Nothing can save him until he changes his attitude and learns how to stimulate his mind and body to unusual heights of enthusiasm at will. The author is unwilling to leave this subject without having stated the principle here described in so many different ways that it is bound to be understood and also respected by the students of this course, who, all will remember, are men and women of all sorts of natures, experiences, and degrees of intelligence. For this reason, much repetition is essential. Your business in life, you are reminded once again, is to achieve success. With the stimulus you will experience from studying this philosophy, and with the aid of the ideas you will gather from it, plus the personal cooperation of the author who will give you an accurate inventory of your outstanding qualities, you should be able to create a definite plan that will lift you to great heights of achievement. However, there is no plan that can produce this desirable result without the aid of some influence that will cause you to arouse yourself, in a spirit of enthusiasm, to where you will exert greater than the ordinary effort which you put into your daily occupation. You are now ready for the lesson on self-control. As you read that lesson, you will observe that it has a vital bearing on this lesson, just as this lesson has a direct connection with the preceding lessons on a definite chief aim, self-confidence, initiative, and leadership and imagination. The next lesson describes the law which serves as the balance wheel of this entire philosophy. The 7 deadly horsemen, and after the lesson visit with the author, the 7 horsemen, are labeled in order shown: intolerance, greed, revenge, egotism, suspicion, jealousy, and the worst enemy that any man has is the one that walks around under his own hat. If you could see yourself as others see you, the enemies that you harbor in your own personality might be discovered and thrown out. The 7 enemies named in this essay are the commonest, which ride millions of men and women to failure without being discovered. Weigh yourself carefully and find out how many of the 7 you are harboring. You see in this picture 7 deadly warriors. From birth until death, every human being must give battle to these enemies. Your success will be measured very largely by the way you manage your battle against these swift riders. As you look at this picture, you will say, of course, that it is only imagination. True, the picture is imaginary, but the swift riders of destruction are real. If these enemies rode openly, on real horses, they would not be dangerous because they could be rounded up and put out of commission. But they ride unseen in the minds of men. So silently and subtly do they work that most people never recognize their presence. Take inventory of yourself and find out how many of these 7 horsemen you are harboring. In the foreground, you will find the most dangerous and the commonest of the riders. You will be fortunate if you discover this enemy and protect yourself against it. This cruel warrior, intolerance, has killed more people, destroyed more friendships, brought more misery and suffering into the world, and caused more wars than all of the other 6 horsemen that you see in this picture. Until you master intolerance, you will never become an accurate thinker. This enemy of mankind closes up the mind and pushes reason and logic and facts into the background. If you find yourself hating those whose religious viewpoint is different from your own, you may be sure that the most dangerous of the 7 deadly horsemen still rides in your brain. Next, in the picture, you will observe revenge and greed. These riders travel side by side. Where one is found, the other is always close at hand. Greed warps and twists man's brain so that he wants to build a fence around the earth and keep everyone else on the outside of it. This is the enemy that drives man to accumulate millions upon top of millions of dollars which he does not need and can never use. This is the enemy that causes man to twist the screw until he has wrung the last drop of blood from his fellow man. And thanks to revenge, which rides alongside of greed, the unfortunate person who gives brain room to these cruel twins is not satisfied to merely take away his fellow man's earthly belongings. He wants to destroy his reputation in the bargain. Revenge is a naked sword, it has neither hilt nor guard. Wouldst thou wield this brand of the Lord, is thy grasp then firm and hard? But the closer thy clutch of the blade, the deadlier blow thou wouldst deal. Deeper wound in thy hand is made, it is thy blood reddens the steel. And when thou hast dealt the blow, when the blade from thy hand has flown, instead of the heart of the foe thou mayst find it sheathed in thine own. If you would know how deadly are envy and greed, study the history of every man who has set out to become ruler of this world. If you do not wish to undertake so ambitious a program of research, then study the people around you, those who have tried and those who are now trying to feather their own nests at the cost of others. Greed and revenge stand at the crossroads of life, where they turn aside to failure and misery every person who would take the road that leads to success. It is a part of your business not to permit them to interfere with you when you approach one of these crossroads. Both individuals and nations rapidly decline where greed and envy ride in the minds of those who dominate. Take a look at Mexico and Spain if you wish to know what happens to the envious and the greedy. Most important of all, take a look at yourself and make sure that these 2 deadly enemies are not riding in your brain. Turn your attention now to 2 more twins of destruction, egotism and suspicion. Observe that they also ride side by side. There is no hope of success for the person who suffers either from too much self-love or lack of confidence in others. Someone who likes to manipulate figures has estimated that the largest club in the world is the It Can't Be Done Club. It is claimed that there are approximately 99 million members of this club in the United States of America alone. If you have no faith in other people, you have not the seed of success in you. Suspicion is a prolific germ. If permitted to get a start, it rapidly multiplies itself until it leaves no room for faith. Without faith, no man may enjoy enduring success. Running, like a golden cord of illumination throughout the Bible, is the admonition to have faith. Before civilization lost itself in its mad rush for dollars, men understood the power of faith. For verily I say unto you, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. The writer of this passage, which appears in the Bible, understood a great law which but few of today understand. Believe in people if you would have them believe in you. Kill off suspicion. If you do not, it will kill you off. If you would have power, cultivate faith in mankind. Egotism thrives where suspicion exists. Interest yourself in others, and you will be too busy to indulge in self-love. Observe those around you who begin every sentence with the personal pronoun I, and you will notice that they are suspicious of other people. The man who can forget himself while engaging in useful service to other people is never cursed with suspicion. Study those about you who are both suspicious and egotistical, and see how many of this type you can name who are successful in whatever work they may be engaged in. And while making this study of others, study also yourself. Be sure that you are not bound down by egotism and suspicion. Bringing up the rear of this deadly group of riders, you see two horsemen. One is jealousy, and the name of the other has been purposely omitted. Each reader of this article may take inventory of himself and give the seventh rider a name that fits whatever he finds in his own mind. Some will name this rider dishonesty. Others will name it procrastination. A few will have the courage to name it uncontrolled sex desire. As for you, name it whatever you please, but be sure to give it a name. Perhaps your own imagination will supply an appropriate name as a fellow traveler for jealousy. You will be better prepared to give the unnamed rider a name if you know that jealousy is a form of insanity. Facts are sometimes cruel things to face. It is a fact that jealousy is a form of insanity, known to the medical fraternity as dementia praecox. O jealousy, thou ugliest fiend of hell! Thy deadly venom preys on my vitals, turns the healthful hue of my fresh cheek to haggard sallowness, and drinks my spirit up. You will notice that jealousy rides just back of suspicion. Some who read this will say that jealousy and suspicion should have ridden side by side, as one often leads to the other in man's mind. Jealousy is the most common form of insanity. It rides in the minds of both men and women, sometimes with a real cause, but more often without any cause whatsoever. This deadly rider is a great friend of the divorce lawyers. It also keeps detective agencies busy night and day. It takes its regular toll of murder. It breaks up homes and makes widows of mothers and orphans of innocent little children. Peace and happiness can never be yours as long as this rider remains unharnessed in your brain. Man and wife may go through life together in poverty and still be very happy if both are free from this child of insanity known as jealousy. Examine yourself carefully, and if you find any evidence of jealousy in your mind, begin at once to master it. Jealousy rides in many forms. When it first begins to creep into the brain, it manifests itself in something after this fashion. I wonder where she is and what she is doing while I am away. Or, I wonder if he does not see another woman when he is away from me. When these questions begin to arise in your mind, do not call in a detective. Instead, go to the psychopathic hospital and have yourself examined, because more than likely you are suffering from a mild form of insanity. Get your foot on jealousy's neck before it gets its clutches on your throat. After you have read this essay, lay it aside and think about it. At first you may say, this does not apply to me. I have no imaginary horseman in my brain. And you may be right. 1 out of every 10 million could say this and be right. The other 9,999,999 would be wrong. Do not fool yourself, you may be in that larger class. The purpose of this article is to get you to see yourself as you are. If you are suffering failure and poverty and misery in any of their forms, you are sure to discover one or more of these deadly riders in your brain. Make no mistake about it, those who have all they want, including happiness and good health, have driven the 7 horsemen out of their brains. Come back to this essay a month from now, after you have had time to analyze yourself carefully. Read it again, and it may bring you face to face with facts that will emancipate you from a horde of cruel enemies that now ride within your brain without your knowing it. In 16 LESSONS teaching, for the first time in the history of the world, the true philosophy upon which all personal success is built. BY Lesson 8 Self-control. No man achieves great success who is unwilling to make personal sacrifices. Lesson 8 Self-control. You can do it if you believe you can. In the preceding lesson, you learned of the value of enthusiasm. You also learned how to generate enthusiasm and how to transmit its influence to others through the principle of suggestion. You come now to the study of self-control, through which you may direct your enthusiasm to constructive ends. Without self-control, enthusiasm resembles the unharnessed lightning of an electrical storm. It may strike anywhere. It may destroy life and property. Enthusiasm is the vital quality that arouses you to action, while self-control is the balance wheel that directs your action so that it will build up and not tear down. To be a person who is well balanced, you must be a person in whom enthusiasm and self-control are equalized. A survey which I have just completed of the 160,000 adult inmates of the penitentiaries of the United States discloses the startling fact that 92% of these unfortunate men and women are in prison because they lack the necessary self-control to direct their energies constructively. Read the foregoing paragraph again. It is authentic. It is startling. It is a fact that the majority of a man's griefs come about through lack of self-control. The Holy Scriptures are full of admonition in support of self-control. They even urge us to love our enemies and to forgive those who injure us. The law of non-resistance runs like a golden cord throughout the Bible. Study the records of those whom the world calls great and observe that every one of them possesses this quality of self-control. For example, study the characteristics of our own immortal Lincoln. In the midst of his most trying hours, he exercised patience, poise, and self-control. These were some of the qualities which made him the great man that he was. He found disloyalty in some of the members of his cabinet, but for the reason that this disloyalty was toward him personally, and because those in whom he found it had qualities which made them valuable to his country, Lincoln exercised self-control and disregarded the objectionable qualities. How many men do you know who have self-control to equal this? In language more forceful than it was polished, Billy Sunday exclaimed from the pulpit, "There is something as rotten as hell about the man who is always trying to show some other fellow up." I wonder if the devil didn't yell, "Amen, brother," when Billy made that statement. However, self-control becomes an important factor in this reading course on the law of success, not so much because lack of it works hardships on those who become its victims, as for the reason that those who do not exercise it suffer the loss of a great power which they need in their struggle for achievement of their definite chief aim. If you neglect to exercise self-control, you are not only likely to injure others, but you are sure to injure yourself. During the early part of my public career, I discovered what havoc lack of self-control was playing in my life, and this discovery came about through a very commonplace incident. I believe it not out of place here to digress by making the statement that most of the great truths of life are wrapped up in the ordinary, commonplace events of everyday life. This discovery taught me one of the most important lessons I have ever learned. It came about in this way. One day, in the building in which I had my office, the janitor and I had a misunderstanding. This led to a most violent form of mutual dislike between us. As a means of showing his contempt for me, this janitor would switch off the electric lights of the building when he knew that I was there alone at work in my study. This happened on several occasions until I finally decided to strike back. My opportunity came one Sunday when I came to my study to prepare an address that I had to deliver the following night. I had hardly seated myself at my desk when off went the lights. I jumped to my feet and ran toward the basement of the building where I knew I would find the janitor. When I arrived, I found him busily engaged, shoveling coal into the furnace and whistling as though nothing unusual had happened. Without ceremony, I pitched into him, and for 5 minutes I hurled adjectives at him which were hotter than the fire that he was feeding. Finally, I ran out of words and had to slow down. Then he straightened himself up, looked back over his shoulder, and in a calm, smooth tone of voice that was full of poise and self-control, and with a smile on his face that reached from ear to ear, he said, "Why, you Alvis just a little bit excited this morning, ain't you?" That remark cut as though it had been a stiletto. One imagined my feelings as I stood there before an illiterate man who could neither read nor write, but who, despite this handicap, had defeated me in a duel that had been fought on grounds and with a weapon of my own choice. My conscience pointed an accusing finger at me. I knew that not only had I been defeated, but what was worse, I knew that I was the aggressor and that I was in the wrong, which only served to intensify my humiliation. Not only did my conscience point an accusing finger at me, but it placed some very embarrassing thoughts in my mind. It mocked me and it tantalized me. There I stood, a boasted student of advanced psychology, an exponent of the Golden Rule philosophy, having at least a fair acquaintance with the works of Shakespeare, Socrates, Plato, Emerson, and the Bible. While facing me stood a man who knew nothing of literature or of philosophy, but who had Despite this lack of knowledge whipped me in a battle of words. I turned and went back to my office as rapidly as I could go. There was nothing else for me to do. As I began to think the matter over, I saw my mistake, but true to nature, I was reluctant to do that which I knew must be done to right the wrong. I knew that I would have to apologize to that man before I could place myself at peace in my own heart, much less with him. Finally, I made up my mind to go back down to the basement and suffer this humility which I knew I had to undergo. The decision was not easily reached, nor did I reach it quickly. I started down, but I walked more slowly than I had when I went down the first trip. I was trying to think how I would make the second approach so as to suffer the least humiliation possible. When I got to the basement, I called to the janitor to come over to the door. In a calm, kindly tone of voice he asked, "What do you wish this time?" I informed him that I had come back to apologize for the wrong I had done, if he would permit me to do so. Again that smile spread all over his face as he said, "For the love of the Lord, you don't have to apologize. Nobody heard you except these four walls and you and me. I ain't going to tell it, and I know you ain't going to tell it, so just forget it." And that remark hurt more than his first one, for he had not only expressed a willingness to forgive me, but he had actually indicated his willingness to help me cover the incident up so it would not become known and do me an injury. The man who actually knows just what he wants in life has already gone a long way toward attaining it. But I walked over to him and took him by the hand. I shook with more than my hand, I shook with my heart, and as I walked back to my office, I felt good for having summoned the courage with which to right the wrong I had done. This is not the end of the story, it is only the beginning. Following this incident, I made a resolution that I would never again place myself in a position in which another man, whether he be an illiterate janitor or a man of letters, could humiliate me because I had lost my self-control. Following that resolution, a remarkable change began to take place in me. My pen began to take on greater power. My spoken words began to carry greater weight. I began to make more friends and fewer enemies among men of my acquaintance. The incident marked one of the most important turning points of my life. It taught me that no man can control others unless he first controls himself. It gave me a clear conception of the philosophy back of these words, "Whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad." It also gave me a clear conception of the law of non-resistance and helped me interpret many passages of the Holy Scriptures bearing on the subject of this law as I had never before interpreted them. This incident placed in my hands the passkey to a storehouse of knowledge that is illuminating and helpful in all that I do, and later in life, when enemies sought to destroy me, it gave me a powerful weapon of defense that has never failed me. Lack of self-control is the average salesman's most damaging weakness. The prospective buyer says something that the salesman does not wish to hear. And if he has not this quality of self-control, he will strike back with a counter-remark that is fatal to his sale. In one of the large department stores of Chicago, I witnessed an incident that illustrated the importance of self-control. A long line of women were in front of the complaint desk, telling their troubles and the store's faults to the young woman in charge. Some of the women were angry and unreasonable, and some of them made very ugly remarks. The young woman at the desk received the disgruntled women without the slightest sign of resentment at their remarks. With a smile on her face, she directed these women to the proper departments with such charming grace and poise that I marveled at her self-control. Standing just back of her was another young woman who was making notations on slips of paper and passing them in front of her, as the women in the line unburdened their troubles. These slips of paper contained the gist of what the women in the line were saying, minus the vitriolic coloring and the anger. The smiling young woman at the desk who was hearing the complaints was stone deaf. Her assistant supplied her with all the necessary facts, though those slips of paper. I was so impressed with the plan that I sought the manager of the store and interviewed him. He informed me that he had selected a deaf woman for one of the most trying and important positions in the store for the reason that he had not been able to find any other person with sufficient self-control to fill the place. As I stood and watched that line of angry women, I observed what pleasant effect the smile of the young woman at the desk had upon them. They came before her growling like wolves and went away as meek and quiet as sheep. In fact, some of them had sheepish looks on their faces as they left, because the young woman's self-control had made them ashamed of themselves. Ever since I witnessed that scene, I have thought of the poise and self-control of that young woman at the desk every time I felt myself becoming irritated at remarks which I did not like, and often I have thought that everybody should have a set of mental earmuffs which they could slip over their ears at times. Personally, I have developed the habit of closing my ears against much of the idle chatter, such as I used to make it my business to resent. Life is too short, and there is too much constructive work to be done to justify us in striking back at everyone who says that which we do not wish to hear. In the practice of law, I have observed a very clever trick that trial lawyers use when they wish to get a statement of facts from a belligerent witness who answers questions with the proverbial, "I do not remember," or "I do not know." When everything else fails, they manage to make such a witness angry. And in this state of mind, they cause him to lose his self-control and make statements that he would not have made had he kept a cool head. Most of us go through life with our weather eye cast skyward in quest of trouble. We usually find that for which we are looking. In my travels, I have been a student of men whom I have heard in Pullman car conversation, and I have observed that practically 9 out of every 10 have so little self-control that they will invite themselves into the discussion of almost any subject that may be brought up. But few men are contented to sit in a smoking compartment and listen to a conversation without joining in and airing their views. Once I was traveling from Albany to New York City. On the way down, the Smoking Car Club started a conversation about the late Richard Croker, who was then chief of Tammany Hall. The discussion became loud and bitter. Everyone became angry except one old gentleman who was agitating the argument and taking a lively interest in it. He remained calm and seemed to enjoy all the mean things the others said about the tiger of Tammany Hall. Of course, I supposed that he was an enemy of the Tammany chief, but he wasn't. He was Richard Croker himself. This was one of his clever tricks through which he found out what people thought of him and what his enemies' plans were. Whatever else Richard Croker might have been, he was a man of self-control. Perhaps that is one reason why he remained undisputed boss of Tammany Hall as long as he did. Men who control themselves usually boss the job, no matter what it may be. Please read again the last sentence of the preceding paragraph, for it carries a subtle suggestion that might be of profit to you. This is a commonplace incident, but it is in just such incidents that the great truths of life are hidden because the settings are ordinary and commonplace. Not long ago, I accompanied my wife on a bargain hunting bee. Our attention was attracted by a crowd of women who were elbowing each other out of the way in front of a petticoat counter at which bargains were being offered. One lady who looked to be about 45 years of age crawled on her hands and knees through the crowd and bobbed up in front of a customer who had engaged the attention of the saleswoman ahead of her. In a loud, high-pitched tone of voice, she demanded attention. The saleswoman was a diplomat who understood human nature. She also possessed self-control, for she smiled sweetly at the intruder and said, "Yes, miss, I will be with you in a moment." The intruder calmed herself. I do not know whether it was the "yes, miss," or the sweet tone in which it was said that modified her attitude, but it was one or the other, perhaps it was both. I do know, however, that the saleswoman was rewarded for her self-control by the sale of 3 petticoats, and the happy miss went away feeling much younger for the remark. Roast turkey is a very popular dish, but overeating of it cost a friend of mine, who is in the printing business, a $50,000 order. It happened the day after Thanksgiving, when I called at his office for the purpose of introducing him to a prominent Russian who had come to the United States to publish a book. The Russian spoke broken English, and it was therefore hard for him to make himself easily understood. During the interview, he asked my printer friend a question which was mistaken as a reflection upon his ability as a printer. In an unguarded moment, he countered with this remark, "No man can rise to fame and fortune without carrying others along with him. It simply cannot be done. The trouble with you Bolsheviks is that you look with suspicion on the remainder of the world just because of your own short-sightedness." My Bolshevik friend nudged me on the elbow and whispered, "The gentleman seems to be sick. We shall call again when he is feeling better." But he never called again. He placed his order with another printer, and I learned afterward that the profit on that order was more than $10,000. $10,000 seems a high price to pay for a plate of turkey, but that is the price that it cost my printer friend, for he offered me an apology for his conduct on the ground that his turkey dinner had given him indigestion, and therefore he had lost his self-control. One of the largest chain store concerns in the world has adopted a unique, though effective, method of employing salespeople who have developed the essential quality of self-control, which all successful salespeople must possess. This concern has in its employ a very clever woman who visits department stores and other places where salespeople are employed and selects certain ones whom she believes to possess tact and self-control. But to be sure of her judgment, she approaches these salespeople and has them show her their wares. She asks all sorts of questions that are designed to try their patience. If they stand the test, they are offered better positions. If they fail in the test, they have merely allowed a good opportunity to pass by without knowing it. No doubt all people who refuse or neglect to exercise self-control are literally turning opportunity after opportunity away without knowing it. One day I was standing at the glove counter of a large retail store, talking to a young man who was employed there. He was telling me that he had been with the store 4 years, but on account of the short-sightedness of the store, his services had not been appreciated, and he was looking for another position. In the midst of this conversation, a customer walked up to him and asked to see some hats. He paid no attention to the customer's inquiry until he had finished telling me his troubles, despite the fact that the customer was obviously becoming impatient. Finally, he returned to the customer and said, "This isn't the hat department." When the customer inquired as to where he might find that department, the young man replied, "Ask the floor walker over there. He will direct you." For 4 years, this young man had been standing on top of a fine opportunity, but he did not know it. He could have made a friend of every person whom he served in that store, and these friends could have made him one of the most valuable men in the store, because they would have come back to trade with him. Snappy answers to inquiring customers do not bring them back. One rainy afternoon, an old lady walked into a Pittsburgh department store and wandered around in an aimless sort of way, very much in the manner that people who have no intention of buying often do. Most of the salespeople gave her the once-over and busied themselves by straightening the stock on their shelves so as to avoid being troubled by her. One of the young men saw her and made it his business to inquire politely if he might serve her. She informed him that she was only waiting for it to stop raining, that she did not wish to make any purchases. The young man assured her that she was welcome, and by engaging her in conversation, made her feel that he had meant what he said. When she was ready to go, he accompanied her to the street and raised her umbrella for her. She asked for his card and went on her way. The incident had been forgotten by the young man when, one day, he was called into the office by the head of the firm and shown a letter from a lady who wanted a salesman to go to Scotland and take an order for the furnishings for a mansion. That lady was Andrew Carnegie's mother. She was also the same woman whom the young man had so courteously escorted to the street many months previously. In the letter, Mrs. Carnegie specified that this young man was the one whom she desired to be sent to take her order. That order amounted to an enormous sum, and the incident brought the young man an opportunity for advancement that he might never have had except for his courtesy to an old lady who did not look like a ready sale. Just as the great fundamental laws of life are wrapped up in the commonest sort of everyday experiences that most of us never notice, so are the real opportunities often hidden in the seemingly unimportant transactions of life. Ask the next 10 people whom you meet why they have not accomplished more in their respective lines of endeavor, and at least 9 of them will tell you that opportunity does not seem to come around their way. Go a step further and analyze each of these 9 accurately by observing their actions for one single day, and the chances are that you will find that every one of them is turning away the finest sort of opportunities every hour of the day. One day I went to visit a friend who was associated with a commercial school in the capacity of solicitor. When I asked him how he was getting along, he replied, "Rotten. I see a large number of people, but I am not making enough sales to give me a good living. In fact, my account with the school is overdrawn, and I am thinking about changing positions as there is no opportunity here." It happened that I was on my vacation and had 10 days' time that I could use as I wished. So I challenged his remark that he had no opportunity by telling him that I could turn his position into $250 in a week's time and show him how to make it worth that every week thereafter. He looked at me in amazement and asked me not to joke with him over so serious a matter. When he was finally convinced that I was in earnest, he ventured to inquire how I would perform the miracle. Then I asked him if he had ever heard of organized effort, to which he replied, "What do you mean by organized effort?" I informed him that I had reference to the direction of his efforts in such a manner that he would enroll from 5 to 10 students with the same amount of effort that he had been putting into the enrollment of one or of none. He said he was willing to be shown, so I gave him instructions to arrange for me to speak before the employees of one of the local department stores. He made the appointment and I delivered the address. In my talk, I outlined a plan through which the employees could not only increase their ability so that they could earn more money in their present positions, but it also offered them an opportunity to prepare themselves for greater responsibilities and better positions. Following my talk, which of course was designed for that purpose, my friend enrolled 8 of those employees for night courses in the commercial school which he represented. The following night he booked me for a similar address before the employees of a laundry, and following the address he enrolled 3 more students, 2 of them young women who worked over the washing machines at the hardest sort of labor. 2 days later he booked me for an address before the employees of one of the local banks, and following the address he enrolled 4 more students, making a total of 15 students, and the entire time consumed was not more than 6 hours, including the time required for the delivery of the addresses and the enrollment of the students. My friend's commission on the transactions was a little over $400. These places of employment were within 15 minutes' walk of this man's place of business, but he had never thought of looking there for business. Neither had he ever thought of allying himself with a speaker who could assist him in group selling. That man now owns a splendid commercial school of his own, and I am informed that his net income last year was over $10,000. No opportunities come your way. Perhaps they fear no man, hate no man, wish no one misfortune, and more you will have plenty of friends. Then likely come, but you do not see them. Perhaps you will see them in the future as you are preparing yourself, through the aid of this reading course on the law of success, so that you can recognize an opportunity when you see it. The 6th lesson of this course is on the subject of imagination, which was the chief factor that entered into the transaction that I have just related. Imagination, plus a definite plan, plus self-confidence, plus action, were the main factors that entered into this transaction. You now know how to use all of these, and before you shall have finished this lesson, you will understand how to direct these factors through self-control. Now let us examine the scope of meaning of the term self-control, as it is used in connection with this course, by describing the general conduct of a person who possesses it. A person with well-developed self-control does not indulge in hatred, envy, jealousy, fear, revenge, or any similar destructive emotions. A person with well-developed self-control does not go into ecstasies or become ungovernably enthusiastic over anything or anybody. Greed and selfishness and self-approval, beyond the point of accurate self-analysis and appreciation of one's actual merits, indicate lack of self-control in one of its most dangerous forms. Self-confidence is one of the important essentials of success, but when this faculty is developed beyond the point of reason, it becomes very dangerous. Self-sacrifice is a commendable quality, but when it is carried to extremes, it also becomes one of the dangerous forms of lack of self-control. You owe it to yourself not to permit your emotions to place your happiness in the keeping of another person. Love is essential for happiness, but the person who loves so deeply that his or her happiness is placed entirely in the hands of another resembles the little lamb who crept into the den of the nice, gentle little wolf and begged to be permitted to lie down and go to sleep, or the canary bird that persisted in playing with the cat's whiskers. A person with well-developed self-control will not permit himself to be influenced by the cynic or the pessimist, nor will he permit another person to do his thinking for him. A person with well-developed self-control will stimulate his imagination and his enthusiasm until they have produced action, but he will then control that action and not permit it to control him. A person with well-developed self-control will never, under any circumstances, slander another person or seek revenge for any cause whatsoever. A person with self-control will not hate those who do not agree with him. Instead, he will endeavor to understand the reason for their disagreement and profit by it. We come now to a form of lack of self-control which causes more grief than all other forms combined. It is the habit of forming opinions before studying the facts. We will not analyze this particular form in detail in this lesson, for the reason that it is fully covered in Lesson 11, on accurate thought, but the subject of self-control could not be covered without at least a passing reference to this common evil to which we are all more or less addicted. No one has any right to form an opinion that is not based either upon that which he believes to be facts or upon a reasonable hypothesis. Yet, if you will observe yourself carefully, you will catch yourself forming opinions on nothing more substantial than your desire for a thing to be or not to be. Another grievous form of lack of self-control is the spending habit. I have reference, of course, to the habit of spending beyond one's needs. This habit has become so prevalent since the close of the World War that it is alarming. A well-known economist has prophesied that 3 more generations will transform the United States from the richest country in the world to the poorest if the children are not taught the savings habit as a part of their training in both the schools and the homes. On every hand, we see people buying automobiles on the installment plan instead of buying homes. Within the last 15 years, the automobile fad has become so popular that literally tens of thousands of people are mortgaging their futures to own cars. A prominent scientist who has a keen sense of humor has prophesied that not only will this habit grow lean bank accounts, but if persisted in, it will eventually grow babies whose legs will have become transformed into wheels. This is a speed-mad, money-spending age in which we are living, and the uppermost thought in the minds of most of us is to live faster than our neighbors. Not long ago, the general manager of a concern that employs 600 men and women became alarmed over the large number of his employees who were becoming involved with loan sharks, and decided to put an end to this evil. When he completed to do much clear thinking, a man must arrange for regular periods of solitude when he can concentrate and indulge his imagination without distraction. Thomas A. Edison. His investigation, he found that only 9% of his employees had savings accounts, and of the other 91% who had no money ahead, 75% were in debt in one form or another, some of them being hopelessly involved financially. Of those who were in debt, 210 owned automobiles. We are creatures of imitation. We find it hard to resist the temptation to do that which we see others doing. If our neighbor buys a Buick, we must imitate him, and if we cannot scrape together enough to make the first payment on a Buick, we must at least have a Ford. Meanwhile, we take no heed of the morrow. The old-fashioned rainy day nest egg has become obsolete. We live from day to day. We buy our coal by the pound and our flour in 5-pound sacks, thereby paying a third more for it than it ought to cost, because it is distributed in small quantities. Of course, this warning does not apply to you. It is intended only for those who are binding themselves in the chains of poverty by spending beyond their earning capacity, and who have not yet heard that there are definite laws which must be observed by all who would attain success. The automobile is one of the modern wonders of the world, but it is more often a luxury than it is a necessity, and tens of thousands of people who are now stepping on the gas at a lively pace are going to see some dangerous skidding when their rainy days arrive. It requires considerable self-control to use the street cars as a means of transportation when people all around us are driving automobiles, but all who exercise this self-control are practically sure to see the day when many who are now driving cars will be either riding the street cars or walking. It was this modem tendency to spend the entire income which prompted Henry Ford to safeguard his employees with certain restrictions when he established his famous $5 a day minimum wage scale. 20 years ago, if a boy wanted a wagon, he fashioned the wheels out of boards and had the pleasure of building it himself. Now, if a boy wants a wagon, he cries for it and gets it. Lack of self-control is being developed in the oncoming generations by their parents who have become victims of the spending habit. 3 generations ago, practically any boy could mend his own shoes with the family cobbling outfit. Today the boy takes his shoes to the corner shoe shop and pays $1.75 for heels and half soles, and this habit is by no means confined to the rich and well-to-do classes. I repeat, the spending habit is turning America into a nation of paupers. I am safe in assuming that you are struggling to attain success, for if you were not, you would not be reading this course. Let me remind you, then, that a little savings account will attract many an opportunity to you that would not come your way without it. The size of the account is not so important as is the fact that you have established the savings habit, for this habit marks you as a person who exercises an important form of self-control. The modem tendency of those who work for a salary is to spend it all. If a man who receives $3,000 a year and manages to get along on it fairly well receives an increase of $1,000 a year, does he continue to live on $3,000 and place the increased portion of his income in the savings bank? No, not unless he is one of the few who have developed the savings habit. Then, what does he do with this additional $1,000? He trades in the old automobile and buys a more expensive one, and at the end of the year he is poorer on a $4,000 income than he was the previous year on a $3,000 income. This is a modern 20th century model American that I am describing, and you will be lucky if, upon close analysis, you do not find yourself to be one of this class. Somewhere between the miser who hoards every penny he gets his hands on in an old sock and the man who spends every cent he can earn or borrow, there is a happy medium. And if you enjoy life with reasonable assurance of average freedom and contentment, you must find this halfway point and adopt it as a part of your self-control program. Self-discipline is the most essential factor in the development of personal power, because it enables you to control your appetite and your tendency to spend more than you earn, and your habit of striking back at those who offend you and the other destructive habits, which cause you to dissipate your energies through non-productive effort that takes on forms too numerous to be catalogued in this lesson. Very early in my public career, I was shocked when I learned how many people there are who devote most of their energies to tearing down that which the builders construct. By some queer turn of the wheel of fate, one of these destroyers crossed my path by making it his business to try to destroy my reputation. Ask any wise man what he most desires, and he will, more than more wisdom. At first, I was inclined to strike back at him, but as I sat at my typewriter late one night, a thought came to me which changed my entire attitude toward this man. Removing the sheet of paper that was in my typewriter, I inserted another one on which I stated this thought in these words: "You have a tremendous advantage over the man who does you an injury. You have it within your power to forgive him, while he has no such advantage over you." As I finished writing those lines, I made up my mind that I had come to the point at which I had to decide upon a policy that would serve as a guide concerning my attitude toward those who criticize my work or try to destroy my reputation. I reached this decision by reasoning something after this fashion. Two courses of action were open to me. I could waste much of my time and energy in striking back at those who would try to destroy me, or I could devote this energy to furthering my life work and let the result of that work serve as my sole answer to all who would criticize my efforts or question my motives. I decided upon the latter as being the better policy and adopted it. By their deeds you shall know them. If your deeds are constructive and you are at peace with yourself in your own heart, you will not find it necessary to stop and explain your motives, for they will explain themselves. The world soon forgets its destroyers. It builds its monuments to and bestows its honors upon none but its builders. Keep this fact in mind, and you will more easily reconcile yourself to the policy of refusing to waste your energies by striking back at those who offend you. Every person who amounts to anything in this world comes to the point, sooner or later, at which he is forced to settle this question of policy toward his enemies. And if you want proof that it pays to exercise sufficient self-control to refrain from dissipating your vital energies by striking back, then study the records of all who have risen to high stations in life and observe how carefully they curbed this destructive habit. It is a well-known fact that no man ever reached a high station in life without opposition of a violent nature from jealous and envious enemies. The late President Warren G. Harding and ex-President Wilson and John H. Patterson of the National Cash Register Company and scores of others whom I could mention were victims of this cruel tendency of a certain type of depraved man to destroy reputation. But these men wasted no time explaining or striking back at their enemies. They exercised self-control. I do not know but that these attacks on men who are in public life, cruel and unjust and untruthful as they often are, serve a good purpose. In my own case, I know that I made a discovery that was of great value to me, as a result of a series of bitter attacks which a contemporary journalist launched against me. I paid no attention to these attacks for 4 or 5 years, until finally they became so bold that I decided to override my policy and strike back at my antagonist. I sat down at my typewriter and began to write. In all of my experience as a writer, I do not believe I ever assembled such a collection of biting adjectives as those which I used on this occasion. The more I wrote, the more angry I became, until I had written all that I could think of on the subject. As the last line was finished, a strange feeling came over me. It was not a feeling of bitterness toward the man who had tried to injure me. It was a feeling of compassion, of sympathy, of forgiveness. I had unconsciously psychoanalyzed myself by releasing, over the keys of my typewriter, the repressed emotions of hate and resentment which I had been unintentionally gathering in my subconscious mind over a long period of years. Now, if I find myself becoming very angry, I sit down at my typewriter and write it out of my system, then throw away the manuscript, or file it away as an exhibit for my scrapbook to which I can refer back in the years to come, after the evolutionary processes have carried me still higher in the realm of understanding. Repressed emotions, especially the emotion of hatred, resemble a bomb that has been constructed of high explosives, and unless they are handled with as much understanding of their nature as an expert would handle a bomb, they are as dangerous. A bomb may be rendered harmless by explosion in an open field, or by disintegration in a bath of the proper sort. Also, a feeling of anger or hatred may be rendered harmless by giving expression to it in a manner that harmonizes with the principle of psychoanalysis. Before you can achieve success in the higher and broader sense, you must gain such thorough control over yourself that you will be a person of poise. While others may sidetrack your ambitions not a few times, remember that discouragement most frequently comes from within. You are the product of at least 1,000,000 years of evolutionary change. For countless generations preceding you, nature has been tempering and refining the materials that have gone into your makeup. Step by step, she has removed from the generations that have preceded you the animal instincts and baser passions until she has produced in you the finest specimen of animal that lives. She has endowed you through this slow evolutionary process with reason and poise and balance sufficient to enable you to control and do with yourself whatever you will. No other animal has ever been endowed with such self-control as you possess. You have been endowed with the power to use the most highly organized form of energy known to man, that of thought. It is not improbable that thought is the closest connecting link there is between the material, physical things of this world and the world of divinity. You have not only the power to think, but what is 1,000 times more important still, you have the power to control your thoughts and direct them to do your bidding. We are coming now to the really important part of this lesson. Read slowly and meditatively. I approach this part of this lesson almost with fear and trembling, for it brings us face to face with a subject which but few men are qualified to discuss with reasonable intelligence. I repeat, you have the power to control your thoughts and make them do your bidding. Your brain may be likened to a dynamo in this respect, that it generates or sets into motion the mysterious energy called thought. The stimuli that start your brain into action are of two sorts. One is autosuggestion and the other is suggestion. You can select the material out of which your thinking is produced, and that is autosuggestion or self-suggestion. You can permit others to select the material out of which your thinking is produced, and that is suggestion. It is a humiliating fact that most thought is produced by the outside suggestions of others, and it is more humiliating still to have to admit that the majority of us accept this suggestion without either examining it or questioning its soundness. We read the daily papers as though every word were based upon fact. We are swayed by the gossip and idle chatter of others as though every word were true. Thought is the only thing over which you have absolute control, yet unless you are the proverbial exception, which is about 1 out of every 10,000, you permit other people to enter the sacred mansion of your mind and their deposit, through suggestion, their troubles and woes, adversities and falsehoods, just as though you did not have the power to close the door and keep them out. You have within your control the power to select the material that constitutes the dominating thoughts of your mind, and just as surely as you are reading these lines, those thoughts which dominate your mind will bring you success or failure, according to their nature. The fact that thought is the only thing over which you have absolute control is within itself of most profound significance, as it strongly suggests that thought is your nearest approach to divinity on this earthly plane. This fact also carries another highly impressive suggestion, namely, that thought is your most important tool, the one with which you may shape your worldly destiny according to your own liking. Surely divine providence did not make thought the sole power over which you have absolute control, without associating with that power potentialities which, if understood and developed, would stagger the imagination. Self-control is solely a matter of thought control. Please read the foregoing sentence aloud, read it thoughtfully and meditate over it before reading further, because it is, without doubt, the most important single sentence of this entire course. You are studying this course, presumably because you are earnestly seeking truth and understanding sufficient to enable you to attain some high station in life. You are searching for the magic key that will unlock the door to the source of power, and yet you have the key in your own hands, and you may make use of it the moment you learn to control your thoughts. Place in your own mind, through the principle of autosuggestion, the positive, constructive thoughts which harmonize with your definite chief aim in life, and that mind will transform those thoughts into physical reality and hand them back to you as a finished product. This is thought control. When you deliberately choose the thoughts which dominate your mind and firmly refuse admittance to outside suggestion, you are exercising self-control in its highest and most efficient form. Man is the only living animal that can do this. How many millions of years nature has required in which to produce this animal no one knows, but every intelligent student of psychology knows that the dominating thoughts determine the actions and the nature of the animal. The process through which one may think accurately is a subject that has been reserved for Lesson 11 of this course. The point we wish clearly to establish in this lesson is that thought, whether accurate or inaccurate, is the most highly organized functioning power of your mind, and that you are but the sum total of your dominating or most prominent thoughts. If you would be a master salesman, whether of goods and wares or of personal services, you must exercise sufficient self-control to shut out all adverse arguments and suggestions. Most salesmen have so little self-control that they hear the prospective purchaser say no even before he says it. Not a few salesmen hear this fatal word, no, even before they come into the presence of their prospective purchaser. They have so little self-control that they actually suggest to themselves that their prospective purchaser will say no when asked to purchase their wares. How different is the man of self-control? He not only suggests to himself that his prospective purchaser will say yes, but if the desired yes is not forthcoming, he stays on the job until he breaks down the opposition and forces a yes. If his prospective purchaser says no, he does not hear it. If his prospective purchaser says no, a second and a third and a fourth time, he does not hear it, for he is a man of self-control, and he permits no suggestions to reach his mind except those which he desires to influence him. The master salesman, whether he be engaged in selling merchandise, or personal services, or sermons, or public addresses, understands how to control his own thoughts. Instead of being a person who accepts with meek submission the suggestions of others, he is a person who persuades others to accept his suggestions. By controlling himself and by placing only positive thoughts in his own mind, he thereby becomes a dominating personality, a master salesman. This too is self-control. A master salesman is one who takes the offensive and never the defensive side of an argument if argument arises. Please read the foregoing sentence again. If you are a master salesman, you know that it is necessary for you to keep your prospective purchaser on the defensive, and you also know that it will be fatal to your sale if you permit him to place you on the defensive and keep you there. You may, and of course you will at times, be placed in a position in which you will have to assume the defensive side of the conversation for a time, but it is your business to exercise such perfect poise and self-control that you will change places with your prospective purchaser without his noticing that you have done so, by placing him back on the defensive. This requires the most consummate skill and self-control. Most salesmen sweep this vital point aside by becoming angry and trying to scare the prospective purchaser into submission, but the master salesman remains calm and serene and usually comes out the winner. People like to use their excess energy by chewing the rag. W.M. Wrigley, Jr. capitalized this human trait by giving them a stick of spearmint. The word salesman has reference to all people who try to persuade or convince others by logical argument or appeal to self-interest. We are all salesmen, or at least we should be, no matter what form of service we are rendering or what sort of goods we are offering. The ability to negotiate with other people without friction and argument is the outstanding quality of all successful people. Observe those nearest you and notice how few there are who understand this art of tactful negotiation. Observe also how successful are the few who understand this art, despite the fact that they may have less education than those with whom they negotiate. It is a knack that can be cultivated. The art of successful negotiation grows out of patient and painstaking self-control. Notice how easily the successful salesman exercises self-control when he is handling a customer who is impatient. In his heart, such a salesman may be boiling over, but you will see no evidence of it in his face or manner or words. He has acquired the art of tactful negotiation. A single frown of disapproval or a single word denoting impatience will often spoil a sale, and no one knows this better than the successful salesman. He makes it his business to control his feelings, and as a reward he sets his own salary mark and chooses his own position. To watch a person who has acquired the art of successful negotiation is a liberal education within itself. Watch the public speaker who has acquired this art. Notice the firmness of his step as he mounts the platform. Observe the firmness of his voice as he begins to speak. Study the expression on his face as he sweeps his audience with the mastery of his argument. He has learned how to negotiate without friction. Watch the physician who has acquired this art as he walks into the sick room and greets his patient with a smile. His bearing, the tone of his voice, the look of assurance on his face, all mark him as one who has acquired the art of successful negotiation, and the patient begins to feel better the moment he enters the sick room. Watch the foreman of the works who has acquired this art, and observe how his very presence spurs his men to greater effort and inspires them with confidence and enthusiasm. Watch the lawyer who has acquired this art, and observe how he commands the respect and attention of the court, the jury, and his fellow practitioners. There is something about the tone of his voice, the posture of his body, and the expression on his face which causes his opponent to suffer by comparison. He not only knows his case, but he convinces the court and the jury that he knows, and as his reward, he wins his cases and claims big retaining fees. And all of this is predicated upon self-control. And self-control is the result of thought control. Deliberately place in your own mind the sort of thoughts that you desire there, and keep out of your mind those thoughts which others place there through suggestion, and you will become a person of self-control. This privilege of stimulating your mind with suggestions and thoughts of your own choosing is your prerogative power that divine providence gave you, and if you will exercise this holy right, there is nothing within the bounds of reason that you cannot attain. Losing your temper, and with it your case, or your argument, or your sale, marks you as one who has not yet familiarized himself with the fundamentals upon which self-control is based, and the chief one of these fundamentals is the privilege of choosing the thoughts that dominate the mind. A student in one of my classes once asked how one went about controlling one's thoughts when in a state of intense anger, and I replied, in exactly the same way that you would change your manner and the tone of your voice if you were in a heated argument with a member of your family and heard the doorbell ring, warning you that company was about to visit you. You would control yourself because you would desire to do so. If you have ever been in a similar predicament, where you found it necessary to cover up your real feelings and change the expression on your face quickly, you know how easily it can be done, and you also know that it can be done because one wants to do it. Back of all achievement, back of all self-control, back of all thought control, is that magic something called desire. It is no misstatement of fact to say that you are limited only by the depth of your desires. When your desires are strong enough, you will appear to possess superhuman powers to achieve. No one has ever explained this strange phenomenon of the mind, and perhaps no one ever will explain it, but if you doubt that it exists, you have but to experiment and be convinced. If you were in a building that was on fire and all the doors and windows were locked, the chances are that you would develop sufficient strength with which to break down the average door because of your intense desire to free yourself. If you desire to acquire the art of successful negotiation, as you undoubtedly will when you understand its significance in relation to your achievement of your definite chief aim, you will do so, providing your desire is intense enough. Napoleon desired to become Emperor of France and did rule. Lincoln desired to free the slaves, and he accomplished it. The French desired that they shall not pass at the beginning of the World War, and they didn't pass. Edison desired to produce light with electricity, and he produced it, although he was many years in doing so. Roosevelt desired to unite the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the Panama Canal, and he did it. Demosthenes desired to become a great public speaker, and despite the handicap of serious impediment of speech, he transformed his desire into reality. Helen Keller desired to speak, and despite the fact that she was deaf, dumb, and blind, she now speaks. John H. Patterson desired to dominate in the production of cash registers, and he did it. Marshall Field desired to be the leading merchant of his time, and he did. Shakespeare desired to become a great playwright, and despite the fact that he was only a poor itinerant actor, he made his desire come true. Billy Sunday desired to quit playing baseball and become a master preacher, and he did. James J. Hill desired to become an empire builder, and despite the fact that he was only a poor telegraph operator, he transformed that desire into reality. Don't say it can't be done, or that you are different from these and thousands of others who have achieved noteworthy success in every worthy calling. If you are different, it is only in this respect. They desired the object of their achievement with more depth and intensity than you desire yours. Plant in your mind the seed of a desire that is constructive by making the following your creed and the foundation of your code of ethics. I wish to be of service to my fellow men as I journey through life. To do this, I have adopted this creed as a guide to be followed in dealing with my fellow beings. To train myself so that never, under any circumstances, will I find fault with any person, no matter how much I may disagree with him or how inferior his work may be, as long as I know he is sincerely trying to do his best. To respect my country, my profession, and myself. To be honest and fair with my fellow men as I expect them to be honest and fair with me. To be a loyal citizen of my country. To speak of it with praise and act always as a worthy custodian of its good name. To be a person whose name carries weight wherever it goes. To base my expectations of reward on a solid foundation of service rendered. To be willing to pay the price of success in honest effort. To look upon my work as an opportunity to be seized with joy and made it is a peculiar trait of human nature, but it is true that the most successful men will work harder for the sake of rendering useful service than they will for money alone. The most of and not as a painful drudgery to be reluctantly endured, to remember that success lies within myself in my own brain, to expect difficulties and to force my way through them. To avoid procrastination in all its forms, and never, under any circumstances, put off until tomorrow any duty that should be performed today. Finally, to take a good grip on the joys of life, so I may be courteous to men, faithful to friends, true to God, a fragrance in the path I tread. The energy which most people dissipate through lack of self-control would, if organized and used constructively, bring all the necessities and all the luxuries desired. The time which many people devote to gossiping about others would, if controlled and directed constructively, be sufficient to attain the object of their definite chief aim, if they had such an aim. All successful people grade high on self-control. All failures grade low, generally zero, on this important law of human conduct. Study the comparative analysis chart in the introductory lesson and observe the self-control gradings of Jesse James and Napoleon. Study those around you and observe with profit that all the successful ones exercise self-control, while the failures permit their thoughts, words, and deeds to run wild. One very common and very destructive form of lack of self-control is the habit of talking too much. People of wisdom who know what they want and are bent on getting it guard their conversation carefully. There can be no gain from a volume of uninvited, uncontrolled, loosely spoken words. It is nearly always more profitable to listen than it is to speak. A good listener may, once in a great while, hear something that will add to his stock of knowledge. It requires self-control to become a good listener, but the benefits to be gained are worth the effort. Taking the conversation away from another person is a common form of lack of self-control which is not only discourteous, but it deprives those who do it of many valuable opportunities to learn from others. After completing this lesson, you should go back to the self-analysis chart in the introductory lesson and regrade yourself on the law of self-control. Perhaps you may wish to reduce your former grading somewhat. Self-control was one of the marked characteristics of all successful leaders whom I have analyzed in gathering material for this course. Luther Burbank said that, in his opinion, self-control was the most important of the 15 laws of success. During all his years of patient study and observation of the evolutionary processes of vegetable life, he found it necessary to exercise the faculty of self-control, despite the fact that he was dealing with inanimate life. John Burroughs, the naturalist, said practically the same thing, that self-control stood near the head of the list in importance of the 15 laws of success. The man who exercises complete self-control cannot be permanently defeated, as Emerson has so well stated in his essay on compensation, for the reason that obstacles and opposition have a way of melting away when confronted by the determined mind that is guided to a definite end with complete self-control. Every wealthy man whom I have analyzed, referring to those who have become wealthy through their own efforts, showed such positive evidence that self-control had been one of his strong points that I reached the conclusion that no man can hope to accumulate great wealth and keep it without exercising this necessary quality. The saving of money requires the exercise of self-control of the highest order, as I hope has been made quite clear in the 4th lesson of this course. I am indebted to Edward W. Bach for the following rather colorful description of the extent to which he found it necessary to exercise self-control before he achieved success, and was crowned with fame as one of the great journalists of America. Why I believe in poverty as the RICHEST experience that can come to boy, I make my living trying to edit the Ladies' Home Journal. And because the public has been most generous in its acceptance of that periodical, a share of that success has logically come to me. Hence a number of my very good readers cherish an opinion that often I have been tempted to correct, a temptation to which I now yield. My correspondents express the conviction variously, but this extract from a letter is a fair sample. It is all very easy for you to preach economy to us when you do not know the necessity for it. To tell us how, as for example in my own case, we must live within my husband's income of $800 a year, when you have never known what it is to live on less than thousands. Has it occurred to you, born with the proverbial silver spoon in your mouth, that theoretical writing is pretty cold and futile compared to the actual hand-to-mouth struggle that so many of us live, day by day and year in and year out, an experience that you know not of? An experience that you know not of. Now, how far do the facts square with this statement? Whether or not I was born with the proverbial silver spoon in my mouth, I cannot say. It is true that I was born of well-to-do parents. But when I was 6 years old, my father lost all his means and faced life at 45 in a strange country without even necessaries. There are men and their wives who know what that means, for a man to try to come back at 45 and in a strange country. I had the handicap of not knowing one word of the English language. I went to public school and learned what I could, and sparse morsels they were. The boys were cruel, as boys are. The teachers were impatient, as tired teachers are. My father could not find his place in the world. My mother, who had always had servants at her beck and call, faced the problems of housekeeping that she had never learned nor been taught, and there was no money. So after school hours, my brother and I went home, but not to play. After school hours meant for us to help a mother who daily grew more frail under the burdens that she could not carry. Not for days, but for years, we two boys got up in the gray, cold winter dawn when the beds feel so warm to growing boys, and we sifted the coal ashes of the day before's fire for a stray lump or two of unburned coal, and with what we had or could find, we made the fire and warmed up the room. Then we set the table for the scant breakfast, went to school, and directly after school we washed the dishes, swept and scrubbed the floors. Living in a 3-family tenement, each third week meant that we scrubbed the entire 3 flights of stairs from the 3rd story to the 1st, as well as the doorsteps and the sidewalk outside. The latter work was the hardest, for we did it on Saturdays, with the boys of the neighborhood looking on none too kindly, so we did it to the echo of the crack of the ball and bat on the adjoining lot. In the evening, when the other boys could sit by the lamp or study their lessons, we two boys went out with a basket and picked up wood and coal in the adjoining lots, or went after the dozen or so pieces of coal left from the ton of coal put in that afternoon by one of the neighbors, with the spot hungrily fixed in mind by one of us during the day, hoping that the man who carried in the coal might not be too careful in picking up the stray lumps. An experience that you know not of, don't I? At 10 years of age, I got my first job, washing the windows of a baker's shop at 50 cents a week. In a week or two, I was allowed to sell bread and cakes behind the counter after school hours for $1 a week, handing out freshly baked cakes and warm. The hour doubts our traders and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt. Shakespeare. Licious-smelling bread when scarcely a crumb had passed my mouth that day. Then on Saturday mornings I served a route for a weekly paper and sold my remaining stock on the street. It meant from 60 to 70 cents for that day's work. I lived in Brooklyn, New York, and the chief means of transportation to Coney Island at that time was the horse car. Near where we lived, the cars would stop to water the horses. The men would jump out and get a drink of water, but the women had no means of quenching their thirst. Seeing this lack, I got a pail, filled it with water and a bit of ice, and with a glass, jumped on each car on Saturday afternoon and all day Sunday, and sold my wares at a cent a glass. And when competition came, as it did very quickly when other boys saw that a Sunday's work meant $2 or $3, I squeezed a lemon or two in my pail. My liquid became lemonade and my price 2 cents a glass, and Sunday meant $5 to me. Then in turn I became a reporter during the evenings, an office boy daytimes, and learned stenography at midnight. My correspondent says she supports her family of husband and child on $800 a year, and says I have never known what that means. I supported a family of 3 on $6.25 a week, less than 1/2 of her yearly income. When my brother and I, combined, brought in $800 a year, we felt rich. I have for the first time gone into these details in print so that you may know, at first hand, that the editor of the Ladies' Home Journal is not a theorist when he writes or prints articles that seek to preach economy, or that reflect a hand-to-hand struggle on a small or an invisible income. There is not a single step, not an inch, on the road of direct poverty that I do not know of or have not experienced. And having experienced every thought, every feeling, and every hardship that come to those who travel that road, I say today that I rejoice with every boy who is going through the same experience. Nor am I discounting or forgetting one single pang of the keen hardships that such a struggle means. I would not today exchange my years of the keenest hardship that a boy can know or pass through for any single experience that could have come to me. I know what it means to earn not $1, but to earn 2 cents. I know the value of money as I could have learned it or known it in no other way. I could have been trained for my life work in no surer way. I could not have arrived at a truer understanding of what it means to face a day without a penny in hand, not a loaf of bread in the cupboard, not a piece of kindling wood for the fire, with nothing to eat, and then be a boy with the hunger of 9 and 10, with a mother frail and discouraged. An experience that you know not of, don't I? And yet I rejoice in the experience, and I repeat, I envy every boy who is in that condition and going through it. But in here is the pivot of my strong belief in poverty as an undisguised blessing to a boy. I believe in poverty as a condition to experience, to go through, and then to get out of. Not as a condition to stay in. That's all very well, some will say, easy enough to say, but how can you get out of it? No one can definitely tell another that. No one told me. No two persons can find the same way out. Each must find his way for himself. That depends on the boy. I was determined to get out of poverty because my mother was not born in it, could not stand it, and did not belong in it. This gave me the first essential, a purpose. Then I backed up the purpose with effort and willingness to work, and to work at anything that came my way, no matter what it was, so long as it meant the way out. I did not pick and choose. I took what came and did it in the best way I knew how. And when I didn't like what I was doing, I still did it well while I was doing it, but I saw to it that I didn't do it any longer than I had to do it. I used every rung in the ladder as a rung to the one above. It meant effort, but out of the effort and the work came the experience, the upbuilding, the development, the capacity to understand and sympathize. The greatest heritage that can come to a boy, and nothing in the world can give that to a boy so that it will burn into him, as will poverty. That is why I believe so strongly in poverty, the greatest blessing in the way of the deepest and fullest experience that can come to a boy. But, as I repeat, always as a condition to work out of, not to stay in. Before you can develop the habit of perfect self-control, you must understand the real need for this quality. Also, you must understand the advantages which self-control provides those who have learned how to exercise it. By developing self-control, you develop, also, other qualities that will add to your personal power. Among other laws which are available to the person who exercises self-control is the law of retaliation. You know what retaliate means. In the sense that we are using here, it means to return like for like, and not merely to avenge or to seek revenge, as is commonly meant by the use of this word. If I do you an injury, you retaliate at first opportunity. If I say unjust things about you, you will retaliate in kind, even in greater measure. On the other hand, if I do you a favor, you will reciprocate even in greater measure if possible. Through the proper use of this law, I can get you to do whatever I wish you to do. If I wish you to dislike me and to lend your influence toward damaging me, I can accomplish this result by inflicting upon you the sort of treatment that I want you to inflict upon me through retaliation. If I wish your respect, your friendship, and your cooperation, I can get these by extending to you my friendship and cooperation. On these statements, I know that we are together. You can compare these statements with your own experience, and you will see how beautifully they harmonize. How often have you heard the remark, "What a wonderful personality that person has"? How often have you met people whose personalities you coveted? The man who attracts you to him through his pleasing personality is merely making use of the law of harmonious attraction, or the law of retaliation, both of which, when analyzed, mean that like attracts like. If you will study, understand, and make intelligent use of the law of retaliation, you will be an efficient and successful salesman. When you have mastered this simple law and learned how to use it, you will have learned all that can be learned about salesmanship. The first and probably the most important step to be taken in mastering this law is to cultivate complete self-control. You must learn to take all sorts of punishment and abuse without retaliating in kind. This self-control is a part of the price you must pay for mastery of the law of retaliation. When an angry person starts in to vilify and abuse you, justly or unjustly, just remember that if you retaliate in a like manner, you are being drawn down to that person's mental level. Therefore, that person is dominating you. On the other hand, if you refuse to become angry, if you retain your self-composure and remain calm and serene, you retain all your ordinary faculties through which to reason. You take the other fellow by surprise. You retaliate with a weapon with the use of which he is unfamiliar, consequently you easily dominate him. Like attracts like, there's no denying this. Literally speaking, every person with whom you come in contact is a mental looking glass in which you may see a perfect reflection of your own mental attitude. As an example of direct application of the law of retaliation, let us cite an experience that I recently had with my two small boys, Napoleon Jr. and James. It is well worth remembering that the customer is the most important factor in any business. If you don't think so, try to get along without him for a while. We were on our way to the park to feed the birds and squirrels. Napoleon Jr. had bought a bag of peanuts and James had bought a box of Cracker Jack. James took a notion to sample the peanuts. Without asking permission, he reached over and made a grab for the bag. He missed and Napoleon Jr. retaliated with his left fist, which landed rather briskly on James' jaw. I said to James, "Now, see here, son, you didn't go about getting those peanuts in the right manner. Let me show you how to get them." It all happened so quickly that I hadn't the slightest idea when I spoke what I was going to suggest to James, but I sparred for time to analyze the occurrence and work out a better way, if possible, than that adopted by him. Then I thought of the experiments we had been making in connection with the law of retaliation, so I said to James, "Open your box of Cracker Jack and offer your little brother some and see what happens." After considerable coaxing, I persuaded him to do this. Then a remarkable thing happened. a happening out of which I learned my greatest lesson in salesmanship. Before Napoleon would touch the crackerjack, he insisted on pouring some of his peanuts into Lame's overcoat pocket. He retaliated in kind. Out of this simple experiment with two small boys, I learned more about the art of managing them than I could have learned in any other manner. Incidentally, my boys are beginning to learn how to manipulate this law of retaliation, which saves them many a physical combat. None of us have advanced far beyond Napoleon Jr. and James as far as the operation and influence of the law of retaliation is concerned. We are all just grown-up children and easily influenced through this principle. The habit of retaliating in kind is so universally practiced among us that we can properly call this habit the law of retaliation. If a person presents us with a gift, we never feel satisfied until we have retaliated with something as good or better than that which we received. If a person speaks well of us, we increase our admiration for that person, and we retaliate in return. Through the principle of retaliation, we can actually convert our enemies into loyal friends. If you have an enemy whom you wish to convert into a friend, you can prove the truth of this statement if you will forget that dangerous millstone hanging around your neck, which we call pride, stubbornness. Make a habit of speaking to this enemy with unusual cordiality. Go out of your way to favor him in every manner possible. He may seem immovable at first, but gradually he will give way to your influence and retaliate in kind. The hottest coals of fire ever heaped upon the head of one who has wronged you are the coals of human kindness. One morning in August 186, a young clergyman was called out of bed in a hotel at Lawrence, Kansas. The man who called him was one of Quantrill's guerrillas, and he wanted him to hurry downstairs and be shot. All over the border that morning people were being murdered. A band of raiders had ridden in early to perpetrate the Lawrence massacre. The guerrilla who called the clergyman was impatient. The latter, when fully awake, was horrified by what he saw going on through his window. As he came downstairs, the guerrilla demanded his watch and money, and then wanted to know if he was an abolitionist. The clergyman was trembling, but he decided that if he was to die then and there, it would not be with a lie on his lips. So he said that he was, and followed up the admission with a remark that immediately turned the whole affair into another channel. He and the guerrilla sat down on the porch, while people were being killed through the town, and had a long talk. It lasted until the raiders were ready to leave. When the clergyman's guerrilla mounted to join his Confederates, he was strictly on the defensive. He handed back the New Englander's valuables, apologized for disturbing him, and asked to be thought well of. That clergyman lived many years after the Lawrence massacre. What did he say to the guerrilla? What was there in his personality that led the latter to sit down and talk? What did they talk about? Are you a Yankee abolitionist? The guerrilla had asked. Yes, I am, was the reply, and you know very well that you ought to be ashamed of what you're doing. This drew the matter directly to a moral issue. It brought the guerrilla up roundly. The clergyman was only a stripling beside this seasoned border ruffian, but he threw a burden of moral proof onto the raider, and in a moment the latter was trying to demonstrate that he might be a better fellow than circumstances would seem to indicate. After waking this New Englander to kill him on account of his politics, he spent 20 minutes on the witness stand trying to prove an alibi. He went into his personal history at length. He explained matters from the time when he had been a tough little kid who wouldn't say his prayers, and became quite sentimental in recalling how one thing had led to another, and that to something worse, until, well, here he was. And a mighty bad business to be in, pardner. His last request in riding away was, "Now, pardner, don't think too hard of me, will you?" The New England clergyman made use of the law of retaliation. Whether he knew it at that time or not, imagine what would have happened had he come downstairs with a revolver in his hand and started to meet physical force with physical force. But he didn't do this. He mastered the guerrilla because he fought him with a force that was unknown to the brigand. Why is it that when once a man begins to make money, the whole world seems to beat a pathway to his door? Take any person that you know who enjoys financial success, and he will tell you that he is being constantly sought, and that opportunities to make money are constantly being urged upon him. To him that hath shall be given, but to him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he bath. This quotation from the Bible used to seem ridiculous to me, yet how true it is when reduced to its concrete meaning. Yes, to him that hath shall be given. If he hath failure, lack of self-confidence, hatred, or lack of self-control, to him shall these qualities be given in still greater abundance. But if he hath success, self-confidence, self-control, patience, persistence, and determination, to him shall these qualities be increased. Sometimes it may be necessary to meet force with force until we overpower our opponent or adversary, but while he is down is a splendid time to complete the retaliation by taking him by the hand and showing him a better way to settle disputes. Like Atrax, Germany sought to bathe her sword in human blood in a ruthless escapade of conquest. As a result, she has drawn the retaliation in kind of most of the civilized world. It is for you to decide what you want your fellow men to do, and it is for you to get them to do it through the law of retaliation. The divine economy is automatic and very simple. We receive only that which we give. How true it is that we receive only that which we give. It is not that which we wish for that comes back to us, but that which we give. I implore you to make use of this law, not alone for material gain, but better still, for the attainment of happiness and goodwill toward men. This, after all, is the only real success for which to strive. Summary: in this lesson, we have learned a great principle, probably the most important major principle of psychology. We have learned that our thoughts and actions toward others resemble an electric magnet which attracts to us the same sort of thought and the same sort of action that we ourselves create. We have learned that like attracts like, whether in thought or in expression of thought through bodily, a good hearty laugh is worth 10,000 groans and a million sighs in any market on earth. Action. We have learned that the human mind responds in kind to whatever thought impressions it receives. We have learned that the human mind resembles Mother Earth in that it will reproduce a crop of muscular action which corresponds in kind to the sensory impressions planted in it. We have learned that kindness begets kindness and injustice beget unkindness and injustice. We have learned that our actions toward others, whether of kindness or unkindness, justice or injustice, come back to us even in a larger measure. We have learned that the human mind responds in kind to all sensory impressions it receives, therefore we know what we must do to influence any desired action upon the part of another. We have learned that pride and stubbornness must be brushed away before we can make use of the law of retaliation in a constructive way. We have not learned what the law of retaliation is, but we have learned how it works and what it will do. Therefore, it only remains for us to make intelligent use of this great principle. You are now ready to proceed with Lesson 9, where you will find other laws which harmonize perfectly with those described in this lesson on self-control. It will require the strongest sort of self-control to enable the beginner to apply the major law of the next lesson, on the habit of doing more than paid for, but experience will show that the development of such control is more than justified by the results growing out of such discipline. If you are successful, remember that somewhere, sometime, someone gave you a lift or an idea that started you in the right direction. Remember also that you are indebted to life until you help some less fortunate person, just as you were helped. The evolution of transportation, and after the lesson visit with the author, nothing is permanent except change. Life resembles a great kaleidoscope before which time is ever shifting, changing and rearranging both the stage setting and the players. New friends are constantly replacing the old. Everything is in a state of flux. In every heart is the seed of both rascality and justice. Every human being is both a criminal and a saint, depending upon the expediency of the moment as to which will assert itself. Honesty and dishonesty are largely matters of individual viewpoint. The weak and the strong, the rich and the poor, the ignorant and the well-informed are exchanging places continuously. Know yourself and you know the entire human race. There is but one real achievement, and that is the ability to think accurately. We move with the procession or behind it, but we cannot stand still. Nothing is permanent except change. In the picture above you see proof that the law of evolution is working out improvements in the methods of travel. Remember, as you study this picture, that all these changes took place first in the minds of men. At the extreme left you see the first crude method of transportation. Man was not satisfied with this slow process. Those two little words, not satisfied, have been the starting point of all advancement. Think of them as you read this article. Next, in the picture, you see the history of transportation step by step as man's brain began to expand. It was a long step forward when man discovered how to hitch a bullock to a wagon and thereby escape the toil of pulling the load. That was practical utility, but when the stagecoach was ushered into use, that was both utility and style. Still, man was not satisfied, and this dissatisfaction created the crude locomotive that you see in the picture. Now all these methods of travel have been discarded except in certain uncivilized or uncommercialized parts of the world. The man drawing the cart, the bullock drawing the cart, the stagecoach and the crude locomotive all belong to ages that have passed. At the right, you see the transportation methods of the present. Compare them with those of the past, and you may have a fair idea of the enormous expansion that has taken place in the brain and mind of man. Man now moves about more rapidly than in the past. From the first type of locomotive, there has been evolved a powerful machine capable of hauling 100 cars of freight, compared with the one small light car that could be drawn with the original. Automobiles that travel at the speed of 75 miles an hour are now as common as were the two-wheel carts in ages past. Moreover, they are within the means of all who want them. And still man's mind was not satisfied. Travel on the earth was too slow. Turning his eyes upward, he watched the birds soaring high in the elements and became determined to excel them. Study also the word determined, for whatever man becomes determined to do, man does. Within the brief period of 15 years, man has mastered the air and now travels in the airplane at the rate of 150 miles an hour. Not only has man made the air carry him at amazingly rapid speed, but he has harnessed the ether and made it carry his words all the way around the earth in the fractional part of a second. We have been describing the past and the present. At the bottom of the picture, we may see the next step forward that man will take in methods of travel, a machine that will fly in the air, run on the ground, and swim in the water at the discretion of man. The purpose of this essay and the picture at the top of the page is to provide food for thought. Any influence that causes one to think causes one also to grow stronger mentally. Mind stimulants are essential for growth. From the days of the man-drawn cart to the present days of air mastery, the only progress that any man has made has been the result of some influence that stimulated his mind to greater than normal action. The two great major influences that cause the mind of man to grow are the urge of necessity and the urge of desire to create. Some minds develop only after they have undergone failure and defeat and other forms of punishment which arouse them to greater action. Other minds wither away and die under punishment, but grow to unbelievable heights when provided with the opportunity to use their imaginative forces in a creative way. Study the picture of the evolution of transportation, and you will observe one outstanding fact worth remembering, namely, that the whole story has been one of development and advancement that grew out of necessity. The entire period described in the picture as the past was one wherein the urge was that of necessity. In the period described in the picture above as the present, the urge has been a combination of both necessity and the desire to create. The period described as the future will be one in which the strong desire to create will be the sole urge that will drive man's mind on and on to heights as yet undreamed of. It is a long distance from the days of the man-drawn cart to the present, when man has harnessed the lightning of the clouds and made it turn machinery that will perform as much service in a minute as 10,000 men could perform in a day. But if the distance has been long, the development of man's mind has been correspondingly great, and that development has been sufficient to eventually do the work of the world with machines operated by nature's forces and not by man's muscles. The evolutionary changes in the methods of transportation have created other problems for man's mind to solve. The automobile drove man to build better roads and more of them. The automobile and the speedy locomotive combined have created dangerous crossings which claim thousands of lives annually. Man's mind must now respond to the urge of necessity and meet this emergency. Keep this essay and remember this prophecy. Within 5 years, every railroad crossing in the country will be amply protected against automobile accidents, and the automobile itself will manipulate the system that will do the protecting. A system that will be foolproof and effective. A system that will work whether the driver of the automobile is asleep or awake, drunk or sober. Come now for a brief glimpse at the machinery of the imagination of man as it works under the stimulant of desire to create. Some imaginative man, perhaps some fellow who never did anything else of note and who will never do anything worthwhile again, will create a system of railroad crossing protection that will be operated by the weight of the passing automobile. Within the required distance from the crossing, a platform similar to the platform of a large freight scale will cover an entire section of the roadway. As soon as an automobile mounts this platform, the weight of the machine will lower a gate, ring a gong, and flash a red light in front of the motorist. The gate will rise in 1 minute, allowing the motorist to pass over the track, thus forcing him to stop, look, and listen. If you have a highly imaginative mind, you may be the one who will create this system and collect the royalties from its sale. To be practical, the imaginative mind should be always on the alert for ways and means of diverting waste motion and power into useful channels. Most automobiles are far too heavy in comparison with the load they carry. This weight can be utilized by making it provide the motorist with railroad crossing protection. Remember, the purpose of this essay is to give you merely the seed of suggestion, not the finished product of an invention ready to set up and render service. The value to you of this suggestion lies in the possibility of thought that you may devote to it, thereby developing and expanding your own mind. Study yourself and find out to which of the two great major urges to action your mind responds most naturally, the urge of necessity or the desire to create. If you have children, study them and determine to which of these two motives they respond most naturally. Millions of children have had their imagination dwarfed and retarded by parents who removed as much as possible of the urge of necessity. By making it easy for your child, you may be depriving the world of a genius. Bear in mind the fact that most of the progress that man has made came as the result of bitter, biting necessity. You need no proof that methods of transportation have undergone a continuous process of evolution. So marked has the change been that the old one-lung type of automobile now provokes a laugh wherever it is found on the street. The law of evolution is always and everywhere at work, changing, tearing down and rebuilding every material element on this earth and throughout the universe. Towns, cities, and communities are undergoing constant change. Go back to the place where you lived 20 years ago and you will recognize neither the place nor the people. New faces will have made their appearance. The old faces will have changed. New buildings will have taken the place of the old. Everything will appear differently because everything will be different. The human mind is also undergoing constant change. If this were not true, we would never grow beyond the child mind age. Every 7 years, the mind of a normal person becomes noticeably developed and expanded. It is during these periodical changes of the mind that bad habits may be left off and better habits cultivated. Fortunate for the human being that his mind is undergoing a continuous process of orderly change. The mind that is driven by the urge of necessity or out of love to create develops more rapidly than does the mind that is never stimulated to greater action than that which is necessary for existence. The imaginative faculty of the human mind is the greatest piece of machinery ever created. Out of it has come every man-made machine and every man-made object. Back of the great industries and railroads and banking houses and commercial enterprises is the all-powerful force of imagination. Force your mind to think. Proceed by combining old ideas into new plans. Every great invention and every outstanding business or industrial achievement that you can name is, in final analysis, but the application of a combination of plans and ideas that have been used before in some other manner. Back of the beating hammer by which the steel is wrought, back of the workshop's clamor, the seeker may find the thought that is ever master of iron and steam and steel, that rises above disaster and tramples it under heel. The drudge may fret and tinker or labor with lusty blows, but back of him stands the thinker, the clear-eyed man who knows. For into each plow or saber, each piece and part and whole, must go the brains of labor, which gives the work a soul. Back of the motors humming, back of the bells that ring, back of the hammers drumming, back of the cranes that swing, there is the eye which scans them, watching through stress and strain. There is the mind which plans them, back of the brawn, the brain. Might of the roaring boiler, force of the engine's thrust, strength of the sweating toiler, greatly in these we trust. But back of them stands the schemer, the thinker who drives things through, back of the job, the dreamer who's making the dream come true. 6 months or a year from now, come back and read this essay again, and you will observe how much more you will get from it than you did at first reading. Time gives the law of evolution a chance to expand your mind so it can see and understand more. I have yet to find the first man who amounted to very much who had not the habit of doing more courage to assume responsibility for his own mistakes without being accused. In 16 LESSONS teaching, for the first time in the history of the world, the true philosophy upon which all personal success is built. By the end, you have been listening to The Law of Success by Napoleon Hill, Volume 4 of 8, narrated by Michael Stone. Thank you for listening. Find more free wealth classics on our YouTube channel, Audiobook Empire. Subscribe for a new classic every week.